If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 101, Chapter 99, Reunion. Once inside, Murasakibara made a beeline for the kitchen and promptly located Tsuna's snack stash. Tsuna shook his head at the sight. It was clear that Murasakibara didn't remember the house's layout very well, yet he had no trouble pinpointing the snack collection. He was indeed an oddball. Tsuna entered his office and said, "Well, make yourself at home. I'll give the others a call. Feel free to hang out." "All right." Murasakibara mumbled with his mouth full of snacks. Upon entering, Tsuna instructed Sabas to clear his schedule for the day, citing a small reunion as the reason. Sabas didn't offer any objections and carried out the order. Tsuna pondered aloud, "Well, who should I contact first?" As he started making individual calls, most others readily accepted his invitation. Then, a familiar voice chimed in, "Tsuna. Let's have a one-on-one." The first to arrive, naturally, was Akin. He appeared quite excited and greeted everyone with a loud shout. However, his enthusiasm earned him a swift smack on the head from Momo, who was puffing her cheeks in exasperation. She scolded, "You can barely walk, let alone play one-on-one, you idiot." Tsuna observed the scene with a stoic expression. Meanwhile, Murasakibara lounged in front of the TV in the living room, a bucket of snacks at his side. Turning his attention to Akin and Momo, Murasakibara casually said, "Oh, welcome, Momo-chin. Just make yourself at home." It was usually the homeowner who used those words. Tsuna shook his head with a light chuckle at Murasakibara's remark. He then turned to Momo, offering her a warm smile. He motioned for her to enter and said, "Well, as Atsushi mentioned, make yourself at home." Momo blushed slightly and smiled, stepping into the room to catch up with Tsuna. Akin, meanwhile, was left bewildered as he watched. He muttered, "Did they just ignore me?" He sighed in frustration and sat on the sofa next to Murasakibara. Eyeing the towering pile of snacks in front of Murasakibara, Akin grumbled and reached out to snag one. But, in a sudden shift, Murasakibara's bored expression sharpened, and he quickly shielded the snacks with his wide hand, giving Akin a chilly look. Intense pressure from Murasakibara made Akin break into a sweat, causing his hand to halt awkwardly in midair. He sighed and withdrew his hand, opting for the TV remote instead, saying, "Okay, fine, I won't ask for one." Tsuna and Momo shared a chuckle at Akin's expense just as the door unexpectedly swung open. Tsuna greeted the new arrivals with a smile. It was Kuroko and Midorima who walked in. Observing Akin grumbling and Murasakibara contentedly munching on his snacks, Midorima adjusted his glasses and remarked, "Feels like a blast from the past." "Indeed." Kuroko smiled and added, "Arg. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Tsuna was about to tell everyone to take their seats when a sudden, piercing scream tore through the air. Confusion and curiosity swept across the faces of those in the room, and they shared puzzled glances before rising from their seats in unison. They ventured outside, their gazes sweeping the area in search of the disturbance's origin, only to discover a blonde teenager being held by Sabas. Momo's eyes widened in surprise as she said, "Kai's. Uncle, they know me. Please, let me go, it hurts." Kai screamed for help. Sabas's grip was no laughing matter, and Tsuna understood this very well. Sabas frowned slightly, then quickly released Kai's and stood up. He turned to Tsuna and offered an apologetic bow. "I apologize, young master. He was sneaking around, and I mistook him for a thief." Tsuna shook his head and motioned for Sabas to leave. Sabas respectfully bowed once more and retreated in silence. "I'm already a celebrity. Why would I need to be a thief?" Kai's grumbled, shooting a dissatisfied glance in Sabas's direction. Midorima adjusted his glasses and asked, "Well, it's not exactly Sabas's fault. So, why were you sneaking around?" Startled by Midorima's direct question, Kai's averted his gaze and mumbled, "I saw you and Kuroko walking together, and I got curious." "Kai's, I knew you weren't very good in the head, but I didn't realize it was this bad." Akin sighed in disappointment. Kai's felt stung by Akin's comment, knowing he was academically better than Akin. "Look who's talking. And why are you here, too?" "Tsuna invited me." Akin replied with a nonchalant shrug. Then, Kai's realized that everyone except for him seemed to have received an invitation. So, he turned to Tsuna and asked with a pitiful gaze, Why am I not invited as well, then? Kais, he didn't know you well enough, so. Kuroko said with his usual calm expression. You're not wrong, though, Kais reluctantly admitted, realizing the truth in Kuroko's words. Suna sighed as he spoke, well, that's all right. Since you're already here, you might as well come in. Really? Kais's eyes brightened at this as he confirmed. Suna shook his head as he walked inside, don't make me repeat myself. The others also nodded in agreement before following Suna into the house. Kais hurriedly joined them with a laugh and exclaimed, haha, you're the best, Kazamaki. Kazamaki. Suna paused and turned to Kais, puzzled by the nickname. Oh, Kais calls anyone he acknowledges with K behind their name, Mamwa explained. Kais flashed a wide smile and gave Suna a thumbs up. Suna shook his head, slightly exasperated. At this point, he couldn't be bothered by such peculiarities. But just when he thought things had settled down, Kais surprised everyone by asking, Kazama, want to play one-on-one? While sneaking around the house, Kais had spotted a proper basketball court in the backyard, so he knew they could also play there. Hearing this, everyone, except Ayamine, who had a sly grin on his face, turned their attention to Kais. Still wearing a speechless expression, Suna looked at Mamwa for another explanation. Mamwa awkwardly explained, he's a bit like Ayamine. He loves challenging people one-on-one. Suna let out a weary sigh and turned to Kais, you haven't even fully recovered from your match against Ayamine. You'd be pushing yourself too hard. Kais scratched his head with a sheepish expression as if he had suddenly remembered his own injury. Midorima maintained his usual stoic expression and asked Suna, Suna, is he going to show up today? A hushed silence filled the room as everyone turned their attention to Suna, eager to hear the answer. Suna recognized that Midorima was referring to Akashi. He shook his head and replied, no, he mentioned he had other commitments. Midorima nodded in understanding. The room's atmosphere grew more somber when Akashi was mentioned. Suna noticed this shift and commented, he's changed quite a bit, hasn't he? The others fell silent at this. They understood that if Akashi were still the same as during Suna's time at Tiako, he might have cancelled his plans to join them. Chapter 102, Chapter 100, Proving Your Worth. Sensing the need to shift the conversation, Mamwa forced a nervous laugh. She redirected her attention to Murasakibara, inquiring, Murasakibara, wasn't your team playing in the semifinals today? What brings you here? The group, excluding Suna, turned their focus toward Murasakibara, curiosity edged on their faces. Murasakibara continued to munch on his snacks, nonchalantly responding leisurely, Akin told me not to bother playing. Midorima, who deeply understood Akashi's character, asked, so, he didn't play either? Akashi wouldn't normally make such a decision to ensure an easy victory. Murasakibara responded indifferently, I don't know, and I don't really care. But why would he make such a sudden decision? Midorima asked. Kuroko shared a contemplative expression and redirected his attention to Tsuna, inquiring, Kazama, do you happen to know the reason? Tsuna casually shrugged in response to the question and calmly explained, well, the main reason is that I won't be playing in the final later. Kuroko's eyes widened in astonishment at the mention of the final. He shot a quick glance at Ayamine and thought to himself, so, Ayamine lost to Fukuda Soo. Confusion spread across the faces of everyone in the room, but Midorima's memory was jogged. He adjusted his glasses and inquired, is this related to the annual gatherings? Annual gatherings? What's that? Kais looked puzzled as he tilted his head and asked. Midorima explained that the annual gatherings were an event for the younger generation of influential families and prominent figures in the country. He said, I wasn't invited because my brother had already received an invitation. As far as I remember, the event was scheduled for the same day as the inter-high final. Murasakibara and Ayamine appeared disinterested in the explanation, with Ayamine making a sly attempt to snag some snacks. However, Murasakibara, seemingly possessing a sixth sense for snack theft, swiftly turned to Ayamine, who instantly averted his gaze and began to whistle nervously. Midorima's statement received confirmation from Tsuna. A warm smile graced Tsuna's face as he added, Akashi probably wanted a fair fight, knowing I wouldn't be playing. He told Murasakibara not to play either because he himself won't be playing. He couldn't help but smirk and continued, he felt it would be a slaughter for Fukuda Soo if he or Atsushi played. Such confidence, isn't it adorable, Midorima? Tsuna's smirk made Midorima flinch, He mused that the only person who would describe Akashi's intentions as adorable had to be Tsuna. Midorima understood that Akashi likely had immense confidence in his team, believing that Rakuzan would secure victory even without his participation. But observing Tsuna's mischievous smirk, Midorima couldn't help but suspect that Tsuna had some hidden intentions. Meanwhile, Kai's appeared to be surprised and somewhat lost for words. It was the first time he had heard anyone describe anything related to Akashi as cute. Midorima, adjusting his glasses, fixed Tsuna with a serious gaze as he posed the question, "So, are you confident about winning the tournament?" All eyes in the room were now on Tsuna, eager to hear his response. Tsuna chuckled, his answer shrouded in mystery as he said, "Well, who can say for sure? I don't really care who wins, especially if you're not playing." Akin shook his head at Tsuna's response. However, his tone shifted to a more serious one as he continued, "But if you do play, don't you dare lose before losing to me." Kuroko's eyes initially brightened when knowing Akin was losing against Tsuna. Still, he soon realized that Akin's old energy wasn't enough to make him the same person he used to be back in Teiko. Midorima wore a frown and pointed out, "Do you really think you can win? You've lost every time you've gone up against him. And just so you know, I will be the one to beat Tsuna in the Winter Cup." He continued, his gaze shifting towards Tsuna. Kai's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, and he boldly proclaimed that he would win against Tsuna. Momwa shook her head, amused by the sudden competition among the guys to see who could defeat Tsuna. Tsuna listened to them with an amused smile on his face. "Seems like you guys are pretty determined to defeat me," Tsuna said, drawing everyone's attention, except for Murasakibara, who was engrossed in his snacks. He continued, "I welcome the challenge from all of you, including you, Kuroko. But I have to say, you'll need to get a lot stronger than you are now." His tone turned cold as he concluded, "Right now, you're all too weak to even pose a challenge." They felt a sense of dissatisfaction when Tsuna told them they were weak, and it stung because they had been on the losing side. However, that feeling of disappointment ignited a spark of determination in their eyes. Rather than feeling disheartened, they all grinned widely, determined to prove Tsuna wrong. The day stretched, and they had many things to catch up on. They spent hours at Tsuna's house, and the evening turned into a late night as they bonded and trained together. The following day, a bustling scene unfolded within the opulent confines of one of Tokyo's most prestigious five-star hotels. Elegantly dressed individuals, their attire reflecting wealth and influence, streamed through the grand entrance. These high-status guests added an air of grandeur to the already lavish surroundings, their presence turning the hotel into a hub of sophistication and power. Before long, an elegant black car pulled up at the impressive entrance. A well-dressed butler emerged from the vehicle, promptly opening the passenger door. Tsuna emerged from the luxurious car in a meticulously tailored and formal outfit. His arrival didn't go unnoticed by the other attendees waiting to enter the event. They couldn't help but send admiring looks his way, recognizing him immediately. A sense of respect and admiration overcame the gathering as the onlookers graciously inclined their heads in a respectful nod or offered polite bows. Tsuna's presence radiated a certain aura that commanded admiration and respect from those around him. The atmosphere seemed to shift in acknowledgement of his arrival, acknowledging his unique status in the gathering. Tsuna strolled down the red carpet, the attendees' gaze fixed upon him, creating a path for his passage. His presence stole the spotlight at the event. Throughout the evening, Tsuna engaged in conversations with many of his peers. After a while, he politely excused himself from the conversations. Tsuna observed the gathering from the upper floor and couldn't help but notice that many of the attendees seemed rather sheltered and oblivious to the world beyond their bubble. "It's boring, isn't it?" A voice broke his contemplation. Startled, Tsuna turned to see a familiar face, yet unfamiliar presence, and said, "It's been a while, Seijuro." Chapter 103, Chapter 101, Checkmate. Akashi smiled, "Well, it's quite unfortunate that we didn't get to play today. But it doesn't really matter, does it?" His words showed his immense confidence in Rakuzan's strength. With the uncrowned kings and a player possessing Kuroko's elusive abilities, he had complete faith in their ability to secure victory against Fukuda Soo Academy. Tsuna smiled as he observed Akashi. "You've really changed," he remarked. "Life is just like that. People learn, grow and change," Akashi remarked, gazing at the gathering below. Their initial exchanges seemed ordinary, yet there was a strong pressure emanating from both individuals, a level of gravitas uncommon for their age. This subtle but potent aura did not escape the notice of the other guests, who exchanged curious and somewhat surprised glances. Suna felt Akashi's imposing presence, though it was not as overwhelming or refined as Akashi's father. With a sly grin, he remarked in his mind, "Your protégé here is quite impressive, uncle." He chuckled and noticed an empty table with a chessboard. Suna extended an invitation, "How about entertaining me with a chess game to pass the time?" Akashi's features briefly displayed a hint of a frown at Suna's words, but he soon shook his head lightly. After a moment, he nodded and accepted, "Sure, why not?" As a shogi master, he was immersed in the complexities of a far more intricate game than chess. Shogi was a cerebral battlefield, a contest of minds where strategies had layers upon layers. Chess, in comparison, was more straightforward. Although Akashi recognized that chess offered a different kind of strategic enjoyment, it was ultimately simpler than shogi. Akashi harbored the belief that he could outmatch Suna in chess. While it might not be a piece of cake, his eyes gleamed with unwavering confidence. Seeing Akashi's unwavering confidence, Suna smirked slyly at this. Sitting across from one another, the chessboard awaited their moves. Before long, the pieces moved with precision, signaling the beginning of a high-stakes intellectual battle. The room's ambience shifted as the game progressed, deep in thought and strategizing. Suna moved his pawn forward, establishing his dominance in the center. The silent tension was palpable as the players calculated their moves. Akashi made his move by advancing one of his pawns 2 spaces on the chessboard. Seeing Akashi's deep concentration, Suna began to speak slowly. "Sijuro," Suna began, his voice filled with the wisdom of experience. "Have you ever thought about how chess mirrors life?" He continued, "In life when we fail, it means we've made a mistake somewhere. It's an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to improve. The same goes for chess. If you lose, it means you made a mistake somewhere in your moves. Luck has no part in it, and it's pure skill." Suna had a profound affinity for chess, finding solace in its ruthless logic. Chess, unlike life, bore no veil of luck. In this strategy game, one's fate wasn't dictated by whimsical deities or twisty turns of destiny. It was a realm where the players reigned as masters of their own destinies, shaping their fates with every move on the board. In the world of chess, they were the god, their wits and calculations wielding absolute power over the battlefield of the 64 squares. Akashi listened silently as he frowned. He knew Suna was trying to tell him something here. As the game continued, the knights, the cavalry of the chessboard, soon galloped into action. Suna's knight leaped gracefully to a central square. This move particularly attracted Akashi's attention as he mirrored Suna's movement to counter it. They've been continuing the game for quite some time, and it should be almost time for them to decide who will be the winner. But during their intense match, both Akashi and Suna were disrupted by the ringing of their phones. Suna felt a sly grin creep onto his face as he commented, "Looks like our game just hit a pause button." Akashi was ready to decline the call when Suna suggested, "You don't have to reject it. Our gathering is winding down anyway." This suggestion made Akashi stop, his finger hovering over the phone. Akashi furrowed his brow but eventually agreed. He rose from his seat and went to the balcony to answer the call. But after receiving the news from the other end, his demeanor changed dramatically. His presence became heavier, sending a shiver through the air and chilling the room. Upon returning to their table, his face was stern as he informed Suna, "I must leave. Things didn't go as planned, hey." Suna smirked at this. As Suna's grin spread across his face, Akashi's usually composed expression twisted into a contortion of displeasure. His eyes, each with a different color, suddenly bore a crimson ring in their pupils. At the same time, an even more potent aura began to radiate from him, causing nearly every guest to turn their attention toward the duo. However, the air this time was heavy with discomfort and unease, as if the room had just been infused with an unseen tension, and it left the onlookers with a sense of foreboding that they couldn't quite shake. Suna casually shrugged the pressure. It didn't faze him in the slightest as he spoke, "It seems like our game will have to wait for another day." With a curt nod, Akashi bade his farewell and exited. As Akashi exited, a few onlookers couldn't help but feel uncomfortable as they felt an imposing aura from him. Suna, however, wore a smirk as he watched Akashi's departure. His gaze returned to the unfinished chessboard, a silent reminder of their ongoing duel. "Unfinished, hey?" Suna mused aloud. A smile graced his lips as he continued, "It seems like you got lucky today, Sijuro." His fingers gracefully moved a bishop to back up the knight, a seemingly innocuous move. But beneath this calculated exterior, a masterful strategy was unfolding. Suna's audacious knight move had been a carefully laid trap from the very start. It was a bait. A little while back, Suna's knight made a daring leap forward. He knew Akashi was a brilliant strategist who would seize any opportunity to gain an advantage. As expected, Akashi maneuvered his knight, hoping to capitalize on this situation. However, Suna had seen this coming. With a soft chuckle, Suna confidently stated, "Checkmate." Suna's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he gazed at the chessboard on the table. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone, quickly opening a message from Nijimura. "We won the Inter-High. We're the champions." A triumphant smirk stretched across Suna's face as he remembered Akashi's reaction. Chapter 104, Chapter 102, Meticulously Orchestrated. The next day, Suna made his way back to the resort, and as soon as he arrived, his teammates swarmed around him, brimming with excitement. "Captain! We did it! We clinched the Inter-High trophy! Woohoo!" Their voices echoed triumphantly as they proudly displayed the gleaming trophy they had secured. Suna chuckled at their enthusiasm, his eyes lighting up. "How was the game?" Suna inquired, turning his attention to Nijimura, who responded with a confident grin. Nijimura nodded and said, "It went just as you predicted." Their conversation was unexpectedly interrupted before he could delve into the game's details. Haizaki, with an inquisitive gleam in his eyes, approached Suna. "Captain, what's his reaction?" Haizaki inquired, a hint of anticipation in his voice. Agiwara stood nearby, also curious about the outcome. During their preparations for the final, Suna emphasized that defeating Rakuzan would be a significant blow to Akashi's pride. He underlined the importance of this game as a chance to prove Akashi wrong, particularly for someone like Haizaki, who had a personal score to settle. And when it came to Agiwara, Suna highlighted how this match was the perfect opportunity for him to give Akashi a slap in the face. Suna's words worked like magic. Haizaki and Agiwara were fired up. It was why their eyes gleamed with a strange light as they watched the game between Yasenhai and Rakuzan-Hai a few days ago. They were eager to observe every move made by the Rakuzan players, ready to crave it all into their memories. As an extra incentive, Suna had promised to describe Akashi's reaction in detail, knowing that the team Akashi was so confident in had unexpectedly lost. So, when Haizaki asked about it, Suna couldn't help but smirk broadly. He replied, his reaction was quite a sight to see. Haizaki and Agiwara's faces lit up. They wore broad smiles as Suna recounted how anger had twisted Akashi's face into a grimace. Watching Suna with his mischievous smirk and Haizaki and Agiwara hanging on to his every word like kids eager for a bedtime story, Nijimura couldn't help but shake his head with an awkward smile. He really played them to get under Akashi's skin, hey. Recalling the recent events, Nijimura couldn't help but shudder a bit as he glanced at his young master. "I don't think I'll ever get used to this. He's just too terrifying," Nijimura admitted with a wry smile. He had considered reporting all the details, but he also knew Suna well enough to realize that Suna probably had a pretty good idea of how things had unfolded. During their match against 2 Academy, Nijimura initially believed that Suna intended to defeat 2 Academy decisively by not holding back and deploying Nijimura's wild card. But now, Nijimura realized it wasn't just about 2 Academy. Suna's strategic move had been intended for Rakuzan. He silently pondered how Suna could plan so far ahead. Nijimura's ability to keep Aomine in check was a way to make Akashi and the uncrowned kings wary of him. This was particularly effective since Aomine was known as the ace of the generation of miracles despite his physical condition during the time. The result was that 2 of Rakuzan's players closely shadowed Nijimura, making it difficult for him to make any bold moves. Suna had given them a clear plan, to make it seem like everything was going according to Rakuzan's calculations. He also stressed the need to shut down Mayuzumi's plays in the second quarter. Agiwara, being Kuroko's childhood friend, was the ideal choice for this task. Even though he was fundamentally better, Mayuzumi's presence on the court wasn't on the same level as Kuroko's. And Agiwara had become accustomed to handling it without much trouble. Rakuzan was taken aback by this strategy, but they didn't pay it much mind and continued to maintain their momentum. Recalling the confident expressions on their opponents' faces during the first half, Nijimura couldn't help but chuckle. Even in their wildest dreams, those players would have never imagined that Suna had planned everything. They maintained the advantage because Suna allowed it. So when Nijimura went all out and captured their full attention, it was Haizaki's job to disrupt the balance. Although Haizaki might not have reached the level of the generation of miracles yet, he was undoubtedly superior to the uncrowned kings. Tsuna had stressed the importance of Haizaki disrupting Mibuchi's rhythm, the one element they needed to be cautious of if everything was going according to plan. With Mochizuki backing him up, Haizaki effectively kept Mibuchi in check. The shock of their strategy falling apart would throw the Rakuzen team into disarray. This was especially true for a team under the dominion of Akashi, who held absolute authority within the team. When a single individual held such undisputed power, the others were rendered unable to make significant decisions in their absence. It was the case with Rakuzen. They had grown reliant on Akashi's decision-making. Fukuda Sogo was almost the same as Rakuzen. However, unlike Rakuzen, where Akashi held absolute control over decision-making, Tsuna had delegated more instructional duties to Nijimura and subtly trained his team to become less reliant on him. This prepared them to adapt and perform even when things didn't go according to plan. On the other hand, Rakuzen faced a different challenge. Without Akashi's direct control, they struggled to regain their composure despite having an excellent coach. Akashi's presence had deeply influenced their mind, making them susceptible to Tsuna's clever strategy. As Fukuda Sogo turned the tables, Rakuzen hastily scrambled to change its strategy. And Fukuda Sogo had been aiming for this all along. In response, Haizaki and Nijimura executed a combination play, temporarily letting go of their double team to compensate for their defensive weaknesses in stopping Haizaki. Nijimura was consistently amazed by how well their plan had worked out. No matter how often he saw it, it always left a strong impression. The celebration continued late into the night, with everyone still celebrating victory. On the other side, in a modern gymnasium with sleek architecture and a pristine basketball court, a heavy atmosphere hung in the air. 4 individuals stood together, their faces edged with unease and fear. They cast their eyes downward, where a solitary figure's silhouette loomed, its distinctive heterochromatic pupils gleaming with an imposing aura. The silence between them grew more oppressive, and the 4 individuals began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, one of them broke the silence, apologizing with a heavy heart. "We're sorry, Akashi." Chapter 105, Chapter 103, Caught in the Spotlight. The news of Fukuda Sogo Academy, the underdog of the Inter-High tournament, emerging as the champion quickly ignited like wildfire. It seized the media's full attention, with Sports Week highlighting the school prominently in their headlines. The achievement sent shockwaves through the sports world in Japan, making it a prominent feature in discussions across the nation. Even though Akashi and Murasakibara didn't actively participate in the final game, Fukuda Sogo Academy still garnered substantial fame. From that day onward, people firmly established Fukuda Sogo Academy, particularly Tsuna, as equals to the revered monsters of the generation of miracles, and this remarkable achievement cemented their reputation in the basketball scene in Japan. In Shotoku's gymnasium, the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement as they were in the middle of training. Takao couldn't contain his disbelief as he waved the newspaper in his hand and exclaimed, "Wow! You won't believe this, guys. Fukuda Sogo Academy actually defeated Rakuzen High." Midorima abruptly halted in the middle of his shooting drills and swiftly turned toward Takao upon hearing the astonishing news. He closed the distance and snatched the newspaper from Takao's hand, his eyes locked onto the headline, "The Rise of Fukuda Sogo, New Reigning Champions." Soon, a small crowd of onlookers gathered around, eagerly reading the newspaper alongside Midorima. The unexpected victory had taken everyone by surprise. The newspaper headline clearly stated that Tsunayoshi Kazama from Fukuda Sogo and Seijuro Akashi from Rakuzen hadn't participated in the final match for undisclosed reasons. "What? They didn't even play?" one of the Shotoku players exclaimed in surprise. The revelation left them utterly bewildered. The absence of these critical players had them scratching their heads, and it was reminiscent of Murasakibara's mysterious absence from the semi-final game for Yasen High. Atsubo looked puzzled as he directed his question to Midorima. "Midorima, do you happen to know why they didn't play in the final?" Curiosity was etched on everyone's faces as they turned to Midorima, hoping he might possess some insider knowledge due to his ties to the generation of miracles. Midorima adjusted his glasses and let out a sigh before he began to speak. On the other side of Tokyo, at Kaijo High, similar inquiries were directed at Kai's, who was also under the spotlight for answers. Kai's face scrunched in thought as he recollected a conversation that had taken place during a casual hangout at Tsuna's place. "I'm not sure if this is common knowledge," Kai's began, explaining, "but both of them come from really prestigious families." As his words sank in, nods of understanding rippled through the room. Several of those present hadn't had the chance to meet Akashi in the flesh. Still, they had witnessed Tsuna's presence on the basketball court during their match against Two Academy. Even from a distance, something extraordinary about him was an unexplained aura that transcended the ordinary. For those who had encountered both Akashi and Tsuna, a shared, uncanny feeling emanated from them. It was as if these two individuals possessed a unique, almost otherworldly quality that set them apart from the rest. Their extraordinary origins unveiled the source of the unique aura enveloping their beings. Kai's continued, shedding light on the situation, and the finals happened to align with an annual gathering of the younger generation from these influential Japanese families. Understanding swept across the room as everyone comprehended the connection. Kasumatsu, still studying the newspaper in his hand, couldn't help but question, but why wouldn't they opt to skip the annual gatherings? Is it really that significant? Sirin Hai was engaged in a similar discussion in another part of Tokyo. All eyes were on Kuroko as he shared, even though they had the choice to skip it, Kazama expressed a strong wish to attend. Akashi decided to forego competing with his team because he wanted fair play, opting to join the annual gathering. I can see why they did not participate in the Inter-High after accepting the invitation. Deep in thought, Sirin's coach, Aida, suddenly spoke. Then she inquired, but what about Murasakibara from Yasen High? That's because Akashi told Murasakibara not to participate, Kuroko answered, reflecting on Murasakibara's attitude towards Akashi. He continued, and even if Akashi hadn't intervened, I doubt Murasakibara would have wanted to compete against Akashi. A hushed silence settled over the group as they absorbed this revelation. They were left pondering the nature of the Generation of Miracles captain. Kagami's brow remained furrowed as he asked, why? Is Akashi really a scary person or something? Kuroko responded, Murasakibara simply heeded Akashi's words and didn't wish to play against him. It's as simple as that. Yet, as he finished speaking, Kuroko drifted into his contemplations. It was purely a conjecture on his part. Still, it seemed that Tsuna had been aware that Murasakibara wouldn't compete against Akashi, even if Akashi hadn't explicitly told him not to play in the semi-final. Recalling Tsuna's sly grin, Kuroko wondered if there was more to this story, something he might have overlooked. Even if they were sure of winning, I can't wrap my head around why they'd skip the game for that reason, Hyaga remarked, his fist clenched. The mood in the room shifted as his sentiment resonated with the others. Their expressions became more serious, reflecting the collective belief that Sirin aimed to win the championship. Tsuna and Akashi's choices seemed to suggest they were indifferent to the championship that meant so much to Sirin. Well, we can't dwell on that now. We've got better things to focus on. Aida intervened to lighten the atmosphere. She sighed before adding, with that said, let's get back to practice. The group responded with nods and affirmations, rekindling their training with a fresh burst of determination. Kais, who belonged to Kaijo High, showed a remarkable boost in motivation, putting his all into his drills. Meanwhile, even Midorima from Shutoku High noticeably increased his number of shots. Although these three teams were geographically separated, they shared a resolute drive to improve in preparation for the upcoming Winter Cup. Are you sure you don't want me to join you? Nijimura asked, glancing across the serene scene they currently occupied. They sat in a serene Japanese garden located within Tsuna's grandparents' residence. The garden was adorned with a picturesque pond that added a touch of traditional beauty to the setting. A small table occupied the space between them, bearing a chessboard. Ask again when you're better. Tsuna said ruthlessly while engrossed in his own moves. Nijimura scratched his head awkwardly. He harbored little hope of ever becoming proficient at chess. He knew his own limitations. Observing Tsuna as he played chess by himself, Nijimura inquired, young master, I know you could easily skip those gatherings. So, why did you choose to attend and, in turn, bring Akashi along? Tsuna paused in his chess move, looking at Nijimura unconcernedly before releasing the pawn he held. He closed his eyes briefly, reflecting on the original events before answering, because the time wasn't right yet. Nijimura arched an eyebrow, curious about Tsuna's response. Akashi is still not strong enough. Tsuna mused, his eyes narrowing with a hint of mischief. In the original timeline, Akashi would only begin considering entering the zone after Kagami's face-off with Ayamine. Tsuna's match against Ayamine undoubtedly had hastened this thought process, prompting Akashi to contemplate it earlier than expected. Yet, with the rapidly approaching finals, Tsuna knew that Akashi had little time to grasp the key to unlocking the door. Tsuna knew of Akashi's missing trigger, so, I'm giving him a little favor. Suna's eyes gleamed with a sly grin as their recent victory in the Inter-High would undoubtedly make Akashi aware of his trigger. This trigger was when Akashi decided to rely less on his teammates and secure victory by himself. Nijimura paid close attention to Tsuna's words, shaking his head in disbelief. Tsuna's strategic thinking was so strong that Nijimura couldn't fathom Tsuna ever losing to anyone. Chapter 106, Chapter 104, A Special Training. Amid the bustling chaos of Los Angeles International Airport, travelers hustled and bustled about, each with their own purpose. In this vibrant sea of people, a particular group of Asian teenagers stood out, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and anticipation, like kids in a candy store. They observed the bustling crowd below as they gazed out from the exclusive solitude of a private lounge. Their faces held immense curiosity while awaiting their leader's next set of instructions. "Wow, we're in the US. My first time here!" exclaimed one of them, eyes wide with amazement. Another pointed to a passerby with blonde hair and couldn't contain his surprise. "Look at that blonde girl! She's so beautiful!" he said. His friend next to him smacked his head and retorted, "Our coach is a blonde too, you dimwit." The leader of the group shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. A butler entered the scene and approached the leader. He bowed slightly and spoke, "Our transportation is ready, young master." "Great job, as always, Sabas," Tsuna praised. Fukuda Soo Academy found themselves in the US. After returning from the tournament in Kanagawa, the team settled back into their usual routine. A few days earlier, they had introduced some new, more challenging training drills, which had led to a fair amount of grumbling from the players. This had become a customary response whenever the training plan was upgraded. Despite the grumbling and complaints during their training, the team pushed through. A few of the reserve players ended up vomiting due to the intensity of the drills. In contrast, the regulars, although feeling close to fainting, managed to power through without losing their breakfast. Nijimura couldn't help but feel satisfied as he witnessed their determination to endure the grueling training. Nevertheless, Tsuna noticed a change in his teammates' demeanor, and it made him frown. Nijimura, ever observant, picked up on Tsuna's expression and inquired, "What's wrong?" With a hint of self-blame, Tsuna admitted, "I should have anticipated this." He realized that he had overlooked something crucial after their inter-high victory. Nijimura appeared puzzled but continued to listen as Tsuna began to speak. "Let me ask you something, Nijimura. What happens when you're really full after a big meal?" Hesitating, Nijimura replied, "I'd probably take a break or maybe even nap for a bit." Tsuna nodded, acknowledging that it was a common response. When people were stuffed after eating, they often felt drowsy and took a little rest or even dozed off. Tsuna wiped his sweat with a towel and then explained, "You're right about that. But imagine, there's more food coming." This left Nijimura even more perplexed. He questioned, "More food? What are we even talking about?" With a chuckle, Tsuna turned to their teammates, who were sprawled out on the ground, and said, "I meant it literally. More food is on the way. Now, if they're already this full, how can you make them eat more later?" Nijimura could only sheepishly scratch his head as he had no idea what Tsuna was talking about, leaving him unsure of how to respond. Tsuna shook his head at Nijimura's perplexed look. He motioned for everyone to gather in a line, and Tsuna turned to Nijimura with his trademark smirk. "To ensure they can eat more later, all we have to do is make them hungry for food again. It's as simple as that, Nijimura." "That makes sense if you put it that way," Nijimura rubbed his chin thoughtfully, finding Tsuna's explanation reasonable. However, Nijimura then asked, "How would you do that?" Tsuna didn't answer Nijimura's question as he gestured to listen to what he was about to say with their team forming a neat line. Tsuna took his place at the head, garnering the full attention of his teammates who were eagerly anticipating his following words. Studying the expressions of his teammates, Tsuna sighed inwardly, discerning their complacency in the wake of their recent inter-high win. "This is not looking good, isn't it?" With a hint of disappointment, he shook his head. The approaching Winter Cup was a vital challenge, and their current attitude could hinder their progress. They seemed to believe they were already the best, making it harder for them to strive for improvement. "Captain, could you tell us what's on your mind now?" Agiwara broke the silence, voicing the unease that had settled among the team during Tsuna's contemplative pause. Upon hearing this, Tsuna beamed with his widest smile, but it wasn't the comforting expression they were used to. And Nijimura felt a bead of sweat form on his temple. Everyone seemed to share the same feeling. Suna's sudden transformation from contemplative to an eerie smile sent a shiver down the players' spines. "Have any of you been to the US?" he asked. Confused expressions crossed their faces. However, before they could respond, Suna worked his mysterious magic, and in the blink of an eye, they found themselves standing in the US, looking around in astonishment. Suna had something special in store for them, a unique training opportunity to push their limits and potentially become even stronger. He hadn't shared all the details with the team, leaving an air of mystery. However, Suna had given Nijimura a rough overview of their purpose in the US. Back to the current situation, turning to the Nijimura, Suna instructed, "Guide the others to the vehicle." Nijimura bowed a little before he gestured for the others to follow them. Looking at their departing figures, Suna turned to Sabas as he asked, "Have you arranged what I've requested before?" "Yes, I've contacted them, and they were willing for it," Sabas reported. "Were they agreed to the compensation?" "No, young master." Sabas shook his head, to which Suna raised his eyebrows in curiosity. However, Sabas smiled as he continued, "They said they'd do it for free." Suna chuckled as he nodded at this. "Send me the details later. I'll be joining the others." "But, young master, we've already prepared a car for you." Sabas frowned at this. "You know what I'm about to say," Suna shook his head as he walked away before adding, "Don't make me repeat myself." Sabas could only helplessly follow Suna's order as he bowed down before walking alongside him. Suna approached the team's private sports bus, finding everyone already seated and waiting for him. "Captain, so, where are we headed now?" Mochizuki asked, drawing the attention of the entire team. A chuckle escaped Suna's lips as he responded, "We're off to play some basketball, of course." Chapter 107, Chapter 105, title at the end of the chapter. Shortly thereafter, they reached a modern-looking basketball gymnasium. The sleek, contemporary design of the facility featured high-tech lighting, polished wooden floors, and massive panoramic windows that allowed natural light to flood the space. The acoustics were finely tuned to ensure the cacophony of sneakers squeaking against the court and basketballs pounding the hardwood filled every nook and cranny. The team members looked around in sheer amazement. They had just entered a gymnasium, and Suna had mentioned that it was privately owned. "Wait, this place is privately owned?" someone exclaimed. "Is this where an NBA team practices or something?" Another wondered aloud. The atmosphere was excited as they tried to make sense of their surroundings, and a wave of chatter spread through the group. The gymnasium resembled the stadium in Kanagawa, where they had previously held the Inter-High. The main distinction was the absence of audience seating, replaced by a sleek, modern glass-enclosed room suspended above the court. The space exuded a unique blend of corporate office aesthetics and a high-end gym characterized by pristine design, state-of-the-art equipment, and a bright, airy atmosphere. It felt more like a place where business moguls might strike deals over a game of basketball. "Wow, look at this fully equipped gym for physical training. Check out the arcade games." The group was utterly captivated by the gymnasium's impressive facilities. They couldn't help but explore every corner, and with each new discovery, their amazement grew. As they ventured further, they stumbled upon an entertainment room that amazed them. This room was a leisure paradise, housing an impressive array of arcade games, a sleek pool table, and other recreational amenities. It was a space designed for relaxation and fun, adding an unexpected element of playfulness to this otherwise high-end gymnasium. As they approached the heart of the gymnasium, the sounds of sneakers squeaking against the court and basketballs pounding became increasingly clear. The air was filled with the echoes of shouts and the chatter of players in English, though the words were unfamiliar. Despite the language barrier, the excitement in those voices was palpable. They observed a group of individuals wearing black jerseys with green accents as they approached the court. They observed a group of spectators engrossed in watching a basketball match. On the court, a tall, big player with dark skin and silver hair faced off against an opponent with spiky, short blonde hair who wore the number 6 jersey. "Nick, come on, step up, man." "Haha," the silver-haired player teased while confidently dribbling the ball. "Haha, Jason, cut him some slack." A bystander chimed in. Then, the attention turned to a cheerful blonde player with a composed demeanor. "This is quite entertaining, don't you think, Nash?" Nick responded angrily, "Hey, quit the trash talk, you fucking animal." Silver, undeterred, chuckled and continued to make his way forward. Nick tried to block Silver's path, but Silver effortlessly used his body to shield the ball, shrugging off Nick's defense. As he neared the basket, Silver declared, "Behold the greatness of me." With a mighty leap, Silver went up for a slam dunk. The sudden move caught Nick off guard, and he was knocked back, tumbling onto the floor. With a powerful dunk, Silver scored, and the onlookers erupted in laughter as they watched Nick lying on the floor, clearly frustrated. After his triumphant dunk, Silver hung from the rim for a moment before dropping back to the ground, where he found Nick still grumbling. "Haha, Nick! You need to toughen up!" Silver taunted. Nick retorted, "That's not fair, man." The entire group burst into laughter at their friendly banter. Meanwhile, the Fukuda Soo players observed the spectacle in sheer disbelief. In their eyes, Silver seemed like an ancient dinosaur. On the other hand, although Nick was fumbled effortlessly by Silver, he displayed impressive defensive form with his well-maintained physique, hinting at his strength. Clearly, Silver outclassed Nick by a significant margin. "Captain mentioned we'd play basketball. There is no way we are taking on these guys, right?" Ishida voiced his worries, and his words spread to the rest of the team. Mochizuki nodded with a sense of foreboding. "We may have claimed the inter-high, but going up against them is like signing our own death warrant." Their hushed discussions continued. Nash caught wind of the chatter and pivoted, spotting a familiar face in the crowd. With a wide grin, he made his way over. "Suna. It's been ages." Suna beamed in return, and they exchanged a warm hug. Nash then shifted his attention to the rest of the group behind Suna. The Jabberwock team, who had been watching the interaction, also shifted their focus toward Suna and his group. Silver's energetic voice rang out, "Hey, boss! You're back! Let's join in the game later, all right?" Suna nodded and replied, "Sure, we'll join you later." Silver chuckled and told Alan to play with him this time as Nick seemed to be done playing with him. Nash scrutinized the group that Suna had brought along. He had been informed earlier that they'd be facing a team Suna was assembling, so he had expected a formidable challenge. But now, he couldn't help but express his disappointment. "Why did you bring such weaklings?" Nash furrowed his brow and inquired. Suna understood that Fukuda Soo had no real shot at taking on the Jabberwock. Despite his team's substantial improvement during their training, the Jabberwock was in a league of its own. This is precisely why Suna needed the Jabberwock's cooperation. With a knowing smile, Suna explained, "That's why I told you to play with us during your leisure time." Nash arched an eyebrow, quickly grasping Suna's implication. He couldn't fathom why Suna would suggest it, though. Furthermore, Nash shrugged and added, "To be frank, we'd probably find arcade games more entertaining than playing against you guys." Nijimura overheard Nash's disrespectful comment and his frown deepened. He couldn't believe Nash would insult them right in front of Suna. Nash appeared to catch Nijimura's displeasure, but it didn't bother him. In fact, he shot Nijimura a smirk, clearly trying to provoke him. Nijimura's eyes widened, his anger surging through his body. Before Nijimura could react, he felt Suna's calm and authoritative gaze, which immediately suppressed his rage. He bowed slightly in apology. Nash seemed intrigued by this change in Nijimura's demeanor. He turned to Suna with a sarcastic comment, "Impressive dog you've got there, Suna." Suna remained unperturbed by Nash's attitude. He was well aware that Nash was generally quite rude to others. Besides, to the Jabberwock, Fukuda Soo was seen as a weakling, which was a fact. "I was ready to offer you compensation for this personal favor, but since you declined it." Suna's gaze fixed on Nash with an air of authority that shivered through everyone on the court. Under the weight of the pressure, Nash's face contorted into a smirk, and he locked eyes with Suna, refusing to back down. He reciprocated by exuding his own pressure to match Suna. The Jabberwock players whispered among themselves, clearly familiar with these confrontations. Why do they always do this? For heaven's sake, it's never ending. The ongoing exchange was the topic of discussion among the Jabberwock team. Nash couldn't help but think silently, even though it might seem like I can stand my ground, Suna's presence feels far more commanding than the last time I encountered him. His surprise was evident in his thoughts. Suna grinned mischievously and said, "So, how about we set up a friendly match with our neighbors?" "Who? Our neighbors? That's quite the favor. We've been looking for a chance to take them down." Nash matched Suna's smirk. Their simultaneous chuckles sent a chill down the spine of everyone on the court, regardless of who they were. Title: Fukuda Soo visiting the Jabberwock. Chapter 108, Chapter 106, Fukuda Soo versus the Jabberwock. Soon after their friendly greetings, which left those around them a bit uneasy due to their intense presence, Suna and Nash decided to have a game following some warm-up exercises. In no time, both teams stood on opposite sides of the court, donning their respective jerseys. However, a noticeable contrast set them apart. The Jabberwock players seemed relaxed, exuding confidence, while Fukuda Soo appeared rather tense. Suna couldn't help but observe this, shaking his head in response. However, Suna couldn't blame Fukuda Soo for their apprehension. Even though the Jabberwock hadn't made any aggressive moves, an indescribable tension hung in the air when facing them. It was as if they stood before a pack of formidable beasts, ready to engulf them whole. Nijimura's face grew serious as he pondered, just their presence alone makes them seem superior to the generation of miracles. Pushing those thoughts aside, Nijimura shook his head as both teams took their positions on the court. With a staff member from their gymnasium acting as the referee, both teams lined up, poised for the game to begin. The referee signaled for them to prepare, and as both teams readied themselves, he tossed the ball into the air to kick off the match. Silver effortlessly gained control of the ball and passed it to Nash, who smirked confidently. Once Nash had the ball, Agiwara and Haizaki swiftly moved to double-team him. Nash acknowledged their approach with a casual glance at Suna, who watched him intently without saying a word. Nash couldn't help but think about Suna's unconventional actions as he recalled their encounter just a few minutes ago. Suna had arranged to meet with their manager, and Nash had guided Suna to the meeting spot, even though Suna was already familiar with the place. It was a gesture of respect. As they strolled along on their way to meet the manager, Nash's curiosity got the best of him, and he inquired, "Is it because of them that you had to come to Japan?" Upon hearing this, Suna gently shook his head, responding, "No, not exactly. While there were some individuals worth scouting, none of them ended up on my current team." Nash furrowed his brow, puzzled by Suna's statement. "Then, why did you invest so much in your current team?" Suna glanced briefly at Nash before resuming their walk, a sly grin forming on his face. "They are my means of acquiring those individuals." Nash couldn't help but shake his head at the revelation. He'd known Suna for quite a few years and understood that Suna was not one to engage in meaningless endeavors. Even if Nash couldn't grasp the purpose, he knew Suna had calculated everything. They'd be slaughtered. Nash couldn't help but acknowledge that Suna's teammates were like punching bags against the Jabberwock. "I know, but it doesn't change much," Suna said. His face turned serious, and he came to a halt, locking eyes with Nash. "Nash, make sure you do it," Suna said in a serious tone as his eyes flashed with a strange glint. Initially, Suna's intention was to get his team back on track, but it was too simple of a task to entrust to the Jabberwock. He craved more. That's why he decided to make a gamble. Nash was puzzled by Suna's motivations but nodded in agreement. "Sure, but if we crush them like a fly, don't blame us." As he reminisced about this, Suna couldn't help but think, if they perish in the process, then that's the way it has to be. Recalling these conversations brought a chuckle from Nash. Agiwara and Haizaki couldn't comprehend the reason behind Nash's sudden chuckle. Still, they sensed a shift in his demeanor as he dribbled the ball with deliberate slowness. Nash's condescending gaze unsettled Haizaki, who exchanged a knowing look with Agiwara. They understood something was about to happen and moved in closer. Studying Nash intently, Haizaki adopted a serious demeanor, but Nash remained unfazed. He observed the ball's movement in Nash's hands, and Nash responded with a subtle smirk, altering his dribbling rhythm. Haizaki initially kept up with Nash's dribble, but he soon found it increasingly challenging to match the pace. Agiwara, recognizing the need for assistance, closed the gap and joined Haizaki. Nash maintained his smirk as he sidestepped to Haizaki's right. Haizaki was determined to keep up with Nash's ball handling, doing his best to shadow Nash's every move. But Nash pulled a sudden move, stepping back and pivoting to his left with lightning speed. Haizaki was left momentarily stunned, unable to react swiftly enough to Nash's rapid change in direction. The Fukuda Soo team watched in awe as Nash displayed his incredible skills. "He's definitely on par with the generation of miracles," Mochizuki shouted in amazement. Agiwara quickly reacted to Nash's movements, but Nash was one step ahead. He stepped back, eluding Agiwara. However, Agiwara's efforts bought enough time for Haizaki to recover and get back into position. Haizaki made a desperate lunge, extending his hand to steal the ball. As Haizaki closed in on the ball, Nash abruptly changed his direction, causing Haizaki to miss his steal attempt. Slippery guy, Hizaki muttered in frustration and quickly moved to close the gap between him and Nash. He intended to keep the pressure on. But that should be N. Hizaki's words trailed off as he saw a look of disgust in Nash's eyes. It was as though their efforts were beneath his notice, leaving Hizaki lost for words. Motherfucker! Hizaki shouted in frustration, driven to anger as he put all his effort into trying to outmaneuver Nash. Suna watched the scene with a calm expression, fully aware that Nash was merely toying with Hizaki and Agiwara. Ha, this is amusing. Nash remarked with a sly grin. He changed his dribbling pace again, sending the ball darting between his feet so quickly that Hizaki and Agiwara couldn't keep up. They watched in awe and shock as the ball became a blur. Hizaki and Agiwara were struggling to keep up with Nash's lightning-quick dribbling. This time, it was even faster. In a bold move, Nash spread his arms wide as though to taunt them, making Hizaki and Agiwara momentarily lose track of the ball. To their surprise, the ball was briefly hovering behind Nash before he skillfully elbowed it, sending it soaring to Alan. Mochizuki, still in shock, was too slow to react as Alan chuckled and took a shot, and the ball swished through the net. Nijimura stood there in silent astonishment. Initially, he considered Nash on par with the Generation of Miracles. But now, realizing that Nash was likely not even giving his best and merely toying with them, Nijimura couldn't help but wear a stern expression as he thought, he's a monster just like Suna. Chapter 109, Chapter 107, In the Clutches of Despair. The game resumed after a momentary pause, during which they processed the fact that Nash was treating them as playthings. Suna advanced with the ball, followed closely by his teammates. Nick, taking on a defensive stance, approached Suna. Suna calmly observed the positions of his teammates as he dribbled the ball to the right, and Nick, in close pursuit, mirrored the movement, only to be outmaneuvered when Suna swiftly spun in the same direction. Nick couldn't help but express his frustration with a click of his tongue as Tsuna breezed past his defense. Just as Alan rushed over to support Nick, Tsuna made a quick pass to Nijimura before Alan could react. Nijimura received the ball and cast a curious glance at Tsuna, who seemed different today. Their typical game plan involved Tsuna orchestrating their play, taking charge of the ball, and breaking through the opponent's formation. Just what is he up to? But today, it felt like Tsuna was deliberately letting them confront their opponents on their own. Nijimura wondered about Tsuna's intentions. Nijimura took control of the ball and began to dribble slowly, eyeing the imposing figure of Silver in front of him. His displeasure grew as Silver responded with nothing but a disrespectful yawn. "This guy doesn't give me an ounce of respect," Nijimura muttered under his breath, his irritation evident. "What an unpleasant motherfucker." Silver, however, seemed surprised that Nijimura suddenly spoke in English, probably the only one who seemed to understand and speak English among his other teammates beside Tsuna. He scratched his head and looked closer at Nijimura before bursting into laughter. "I thought you were just like the rest of these guys, but it looks like you're a talking monkey, hey?" Silver's arrogance only deepened Nijimura's frown. Nijimura couldn't ignore the blatant disrespect from Silver, even though he recognized Silver's undeniable skills. He was determined not to let Silver's attitude slide without some consequences. Within a second, he made a sharp move to the side, attempting to outmaneuver Silver. You've got some speed for a monkey," Silver remarked in a casual tone, unfazed by Nijimura's quick footwork. Nijimura couldn't help but show his frustration as he clicked his tongue. He stepped back and swiftly rotated in the opposite direction, hoping to put some distance between himself and Silver. As Nijimura executed his maneuver, a hand suddenly darted in to snatch the ball from him. He realized that taking on Silver alone wouldn't be an easy task. Frustration flashed across his face as he watched the ball being effortlessly swiped from his grasp. The turn of events once again took aback Fukuda Soo players. Nijimura, their formidable center, was no ordinary player. His agility was exceptional, even surpassing that of Hizaki and second only to Tsuna. Yet, he had just been outplayed by Silver effortlessly. Observing Silver's relentless dribble toward them, Fukuda Soo's players sprang into action, swiftly organizing a defensive line to prevent him from scoring. Silver only laughed at them as he kept advancing forward, completely disregarding their defense as if it were nothing. He dribbled the ball between his legs with lightning speed, toying with the defenders as if they were mere traffic cones. Agiwara, Mochizuki, and Hizaki had built a solid defensive wall, but their mounting frustration was palpable. They were, after all, the reigning champions of Japan's inter-high tournament. Yet here, in the US, they felt like amateurs against Silver. Silver seemed to have complete control over the ball, effortlessly performing flashy behind-the-back crossovers and no-look passes to Nick. Despite recognizing Silver's moves, Aguilera could only shake his head in disbelief. With a mischievous grin, Silver sent the ball high near the basket, then soared into the air, snatching the ball mid-flight. Time seemed to slow as he slammed the ball through the hoop and hung in mid-air, his dominance on full display. Silver maintained his taunting grin, relishing the frustration in Fukuda Soo's players' eyes. After his impressive slam dunk, he hung on the rim for a moment, looking down at the bewildered defenders. With a smirk, he shouted, "Step up, kiddos. You'll need more than that to stop me." Silver's taunts were met with a combination of laughter and applause from his fellow Jabberwock players. The sound only fueled the growing anger among Fukuda Soo's team. The players from Fukuda Soo ground their teeth in frustration, unwilling to endure the humiliation any longer. However, as the game pressed on, they realized their helplessness. They were completely outmatched and unable to alter the course of the game. Unbeknownst to them, their initial frustration and anger gradually morphed into something more profound. An unsettling acceptance. Over time, this feeling of resignation began to deepen, ultimately transforming into a profound sense of despair as their moves slowly became stiff, as if their spirit had left their bodies. They faced a harsh reality: their situation seemed almost impossible to change. The Fukuda Soo players glanced at Tsuna, their star player, as he dribbled the ball and successfully navigated Silver's defense. A glimmer of hope ignited in their eyes. But instantly, that hope was dashed as Nash swiftly closed in on Tsuna, stealing the ball from him. It was clear that even Tsuna, their strongest player, couldn't find a way past Nash and Silver, who were constantly hounding his every move. Nash advanced towards their defensive line, and they stood there, powerless to stop him. He effortlessly penetrated their defense, scoring yet another point. With heavy hearts, they all shifted their gaze to the unforgiving scoreboard. Their once hopeful eyes now seemed empty and lifeless. The desolation gripping them was akin to a deathly shroud, for it dawned upon them that they had failed to muster even a single point. Their despair was palpable, and they could only watch helplessly as the Jabberwock piled on the points. As the game pressed on, a disheartened atmosphere hung in the air, making every second feel like an eternity. Time seemed to stretch out, slowing to a crawl in tandem with the players' expressions, contorted by despair. When their opponents approached, an overwhelming sensation washed over them. Their limbs felt as if weighted by an invisible force, rendering them nearly immobile. It wasn't that they physically couldn't move, but rather, a paralyzing fear held them captive. They couldn't even gather the courage to attempt anything, recognizing the insurmountable gulf that separated them from their rivals. The battle was lost in their hearts before it was lost on the court. They had given up. Amid the unfolding chaos, a flicker of realization darted among the Jabberwock players as they exchanged uneasy glances, the thought gnawing at them. Did we go a bit overboard? Yet, as their gazes shifted to Tsuna, a shiver ran down their spines, and they couldn't help but gulp nervously. The once familiar eyes that now bore into Fukuda Soo were devoid of all emotion. Those eyes had turned into an abyss of emptiness, sending a shudder of unease through the Jabberwock players. Chapter 110, Chapter 108, Unwavering Resolve. The players of Fukuda Soo stood still, like they were caught in a world of despair. Their faces, once full of determination, now carried expressions of complete hopelessness. It was as if their dreams and ambitions had been drained away, leaving them adrift in the abyss of defeat, struggling to grasp the immense power of the Jabberwock. Aguilera, lost in his thoughts, felt a haunting familiarity with this feeling. It was the same despair he had experienced during the final match against the Generation of Miracles in middle school. He held his chest, feeling his heart still pounding, and a sense of helplessness washed over him. I can't change any of this. From the very beginning, I've been nothing more than a powerless ant, Aguilera thought, his gaze empty as he looked up. The same sense of defeat weighed heavily on the hearts of the other Fukuda Soo players. Haizaki, typically known for his aggressiveness, remained eerily silent. The overwhelming sense of powerlessness he felt now eclipsed any frustration he'd ever experienced, even when facing Akashi, who had crushed his basketball career in middle school. He could only lower his head in utter defeat, his thoughts echoing, I thought I was something when we won the inter-high. Turns out, it was all just a fleeting illusion. Ultimately, we couldn't do a thing. We're just dragging Tsuna down. Nijimura, despite his prior acquaintance with the Jabberwock during his time in the United States, was now facing them on the court for the first time. The sheer strength they displayed left him feeling entirely powerless. But as despair settled over the team like a heavy shroud, the rhythmic bounce of a basketball pierced through the oppressive silence. Their eyes, which had been glazed with hopelessness, snapped toward the source. They spotted Tsuna, who appeared unfazed by their predicament, dribbling the ball with a stoic expression. Speechless and overwhelmed by disbelief, the team couldn't manage a single word. Nijimura glanced at Tsuna, his own thoughts in turmoil. "You should be feeling the weight of this more than anyone," he silently remarked, surprised by Tsuna's composure. He'd never seen Tsuna lose before. It was like witnessing something completely new. He couldn't remember a single time when Tsuna's side was losing. But now, Tsuna stood there, his face blank and unemotional despite the overwhelming odds against him. It just didn't make sense. How could Tsuna, who should blame them for being such a heavyweight, not be affected? They could only watch in astonishment as Tsuna strode past them, his gaze fixed on the Jabberwock expressionlessly, as though they didn't exist, and advanced forward, facing the formidable opposition alone. As they gazed at Tsuna's lonely figure, their mouths fell agape in sheer disbelief. Yet, their voices seemed held captive, as though an invisible hand had constricted their throats. It wasn't just their vocal cords that were paralyzed, their breath felt constricted. The sight of Tsuna confronting those monstrous players alone left an indelible mark on their souls, suffocating them with a sense of dread and helplessness that made it hard for them to breathe. Nash's expression turned serious for the first time, mirroring the other Jabberwock players. They regarded Tsuna with newfound respect. In the face of this situation, most people would have given up, just like the players on Fukuda Soo. However, Nash declared as he advanced towards Tsuna, his pressure intensifying, "Taking us on alone won't alter the outcome." Tsuna was no ordinary player, and Nash understood this better than anyone. Even with his formidable Belial Eyes ability, Nash wasn't confident about facing Tsuna alone. However, Silver quickly joined him to form a double team against Tsuna. Nash was confident that if Tsuna had been on his own, he wouldn't have been able to break through their defense. "All your efforts were in vain, Tsuna," Nash declared earnestly. In the heat of the basketball showdown, Tsuna responded with silence. Their movements were like a carefully choreographed dance, with Silver providing solid support to Nash. But despite the prolonged battle, there was no clear outcome. Tsuna skillfully dribbled the ball, and a frown was etched on his face. It was a high-stakes battle of skills and wits, but the outcome remained uncertain. Nash wiped sweat from his brow, his thoughts racing. I might have said his effort was meaningless, but the last time they faced off, Tsuna's skills weren't at this level. The extent of his improvement was almost unbelievable, but Nash had witnessed it firsthand. On the Jabberwock side, the players shared in the collective surprise. Nick moved swiftly to join Nash and Silver as they converged on Tsuna together. They engaged in another frenzied showdown. In a brilliant move, Silver managed to steal the ball with assistance from Nick, who quickly joined in to support him and Nash. Silver surged forward, his senses keenly tuned to Tsuna, who pursued him relentlessly. He maintained his unwavering focus as he glided past the silent Fukuda Soo players, who stood motionless, overwhelmed by their utter powerlessness in the face of the situation. "I always knew the boss was a formidable player, but the way he's single-handedly challenging our defense. He truly lives up to his reputation," Silver mused silently. His earlier taunting expression had vanished, replaced by seriousness and respect. As Silver soared toward the basket for a dunk, he sensed a looming presence closing in rapidly from his side, aiming to snatch the ball. He reacted quickly, abruptly shifting his weight and planting his feet firmly. A flash of pain shot through him, but his eyes widened in astonishment as Tsuna materialized right beside him, blocking his path. With limited options, Silver swiftly dished the ball to Alan, who received it with surprise and promptly sank a basket. "This is insane," Nash couldn't help muttering as he returned to his position. The game pressed on, and Tsuna again took the lead, dribbling the ball solo. His teammates watched in disbelief, captivated by Tsuna's unwavering determination. Agiwara struggled with his desire to question Tsuna but held his words back with determination. He remembered their initial encounter when Tsuna had asked if he was willing to put sweat and blood into their love for basketball. He had agreed, fully aware of the rigorous training that lay ahead. As he watched Tsuna face off against the Jabberwock, Agiwara couldn't help but think about the relentless pain he had endured during their training. "I've gritted my teeth through every moment of that training," Agiwara thought to himself. He tried to summon the courage to endure his physical and emotional pain as he witnessed Tsuna's incredible performance. Chapter 111, Chapter 109, Reforging Their Commitment. Tsuna continued his relentless advance, taking on the Jabberwock with unwavering determination. The Jabberwock pushed back, pouring all their strength into defending their territory. As time passed, Nash's expression grew serious. It was clear that Tsuna was not crumbling under the pressure, instead, he was thriving under it. With each passing moment, he adapted and improved, leaving the Jabberwock bewildered. The more they tried to pressure Tsuna, the more he defied their expectations. His performance became so extraordinary that it was almost impossible for the Jabberwock to keep up with his pace. First, Nick, and then Alan joined in to support their defense. If Tsuna continued to perform at this level, it would require Zack to come into play, making it an actual 1v5 situation. Nash dribbled the ball thoughtfully with Tsuna hot on his heels. While observing Tsuna's expressionless demeanor, Nash couldn't help but think, no, he doesn't improve on the spot. This guy has analyzed our movements and patterns, using them to his advantage by acting accordingly. Nash considered his options, realizing the formidable opponent he faced. Should I use it? He wondered grimly. Yet, he knew employing his eyes into their current situation would likely unleash their downfall. Tsuna would undoubtedly respond with the eyes he had showcased during their initial encounter. As reluctant as he was to admit it, Tsuna's current abilities were already frightening, let alone involving those uncanny eyes. For the first time, Nash felt like he had encountered someone superior to himself. Nevertheless, he couldn't fully comprehend the situation. As they continued their intricate dance on the court, Nash suddenly paused and couldn't help but voice his confusion. I just don't get it, Tsuna, he said with a furrowed brow. Why are you going to such lengths for your trashy teammates? Nash's words had a profound impact on the Fukuda Soo players, leaving them unable to respond, each one grappling with their own feelings of inadequacy. I didn't do it for anyone, Tsuna replied, shaking his head. He approached Nash, his determination clear. I'm doing this for myself. Nash furrowed his brow, dribbling the ball deftly between his legs to evade Tsuna's relentless advances. Regardless of the direness of my circumstances, I do not resemble a feeble fowl passively awaiting its demise. As the intense basketball showdown continued, Tsuna suddenly spoke. I am undertaking this endeavor for my own sake, for if I were to neglect it, I would deem myself unworthy of pursuing my aspiration to attain the pinnacle of excellence. His words resonated deeply with everyone on the court, conveying his unrelenting desire to achieve his aspirations. Nash was surprised by Tsuna's words, it was a side of him he hadn't seen before. He couldn't help but wear a helpless smile as he passed the ball to Silver, feeling the intense pressure of facing Tsuna. No wonder he didn't even flinch knowing he was unable to play in a street ball tournament because of his involvement as an investor. Nash couldn't help but thought of a certain stage that had been the center of the basketball world, admiring Tsuna's lofty ambition, which matched his personality. Tsuna chased after Silver, but it was too late as Silver scored more points for the Jabberwock. The gym remained eerily silent, with Tsuna's words echoing in everyone's minds. Nijimura was deeply affected by those words. He had trained in martial arts alongside Tsuna in the past, so he knew Tsuna's unyielding nature better than anyone. That's the young master I know, Nijimura thought, a glimmer of understanding lighting up his eyes. Tsuna once again took control of the ball and, as usual, made his way to the basket, going at it alone. As Tsuna made his way through the motionless Fukuda Soo players, he spoke slowly, and his words hung heavy in the air. Besides, he said, locking eyes with his teammates. His gaze was calm, his expression devoid of emotion. I've been clear from the beginning. This is only for the strong. Time seemed to slow as Tsuna's words settled in. It felt as if he were peering into their very souls with those emotionless eyes. Everyone was free to leave, as I have no use for the weak, Tsuna stated coldly, resuming his one-man battle against the Jabberwock. Silence gripped the court as Tsuna's words settled in. Everyone in Fukuda Soo wanted Tsuna to scold them, blame their weakness, or reprimand their unsightly behavior. Tsuna's words cut deep, striking right where it hurt, intensifying their emotional pain. A mixture of feelings swirled within them. Yet, within their hearts, a more potent emotion took root. They longed to stand beside Tsuna, who fearlessly confronted powerful adversaries without a shred of hesitation. As these thoughts churned in their minds, a resounding slap rang out, drawing their wide-eyed attention to Nijimura. He had just slapped his own face, leaving red marks in the wake of his sudden action. With a deep breath, Nijimura's expression transformed into unwavering resolve. He directed his determined gaze towards Tsuna, embroiled in a fierce and solitary basketball duel against the Jabberwock. In his heart, Nijimura thought, "That's right, I've sworn to stand by his side as his sword. Regret won't change anything. I should be braver and do my job properly this time." Nijimura muttered under his breath before rushing to Tsuna's side to support him. As Nijimura silently left their side, the rest of the team stood stunned, unable to find their voices. Haizaki, in particular, felt an intense frustration building up within him. When he begrudgingly joined the club, he never expected to experience this sense of belonging that was now taking root. It was a strange feeling, one that he hadn't encountered even during his days at Tiako playing with the Generation of Miracles. The gratitude for this newfound feeling weighed heavily on him, all thanks to Tsuna. Still, Haizaki's pride was a formidable obstacle, refusing to concede to this reality. Yet, a peculiar determination shone in his otherwise lifeless eyes. He understood that he had something to prove. "That's it. I've pledged to prove him wrong too. I can't do that if I stay weak," Haizaki proclaimed. Those words were not aimed at anyone else by himself. And with newfound resolve, he stepped forward to support his Tsuna and Nijimura. Agiwara had been mustering his courage, but seeing Nijimura and Haizaki move ahead of him made him feel ashamed. "That's right, even Senior Nijimura and my best friend could do that. I should be able to do the same." He shook his head vigorously, trying to regain his composure, and then he roared like a beast. Agiwara recalled Nijimura's words about letting out one's inner feelings but not letting them take over. It was about conscious control, being a knight, a warrior, and the sharpest sword for their captain. Agiwara's presence suddenly emanated a powerful, controlled pressure, different from his usual beastly instincts. It was as if his aura had sharpened to an even finer point under his conscious command. Agiwara's gaze turned sharp as he sprinted forward to join Nijimura and Haizaki in supporting their captain. Mochizuki, too, appeared to have regained his composure and followed Agiwara's lead. "I may not have anything special," he thought, "but I refuse to be the weak one in our team." Nash couldn't believe his eyes as he watched the Fukuda Soo players. There was something different in the air among each one of them. "So, this was what you were after, Tsuna." As he saw Tsuna's smirk, he couldn't help but break into a sweat. "You want an unwavering army, ready to follow your command no matter what." Chapter 112, Chapter 110, Breaking the Ice, Scoring Their First Points. Nash hardened his expression as he remarked, "But there's still no way for you to change the outcome of this game." Tsuna continued to dribble the ball at an incredible speed, with the Jabberwock players doggedly keeping up, even though it seemed nearly impossible. However, Tsuna maintained his relentless pace, causing the Jabberwock players to break into a sweat. Silver couldn't help but think, "We knew he was a monster, but what's with this intense pressure?" Silver, who was known for his excessive arrogance, had a personality quite like Nash's. He wasn't the kind to easily acknowledge others, especially in the world of street ball. But Tsuna was different. He was one of the very few people who had earned Silver's respect. It all began during Tsuna's one-on-one with Nash. As Silver got to know Tsuna better while he managed the team and played alongside them, he became deeply impressed with Tsuna's innovative minds, which had made the team internationally renowned. Tsuna's dedication left everyone in awe. He trained tirelessly, often pushing himself even harder than the rest of them. His commitment and motivation were truly remarkable. Tsunayoshi Kazama, as they came to know him, was an exceptional player, and his work ethic was off the charts. He had a unique drive that set him apart. Silver had always recognized Tsuna's talent, and even Nash wanted him to join their team. However, there were some reasons preventing Tsuna from playing with them, which was quite unfortunate. Silver closely followed Tsuna's every move. Tsuna wore a confident smirk as he quickly maneuvered, stepping back and creating space between them. In a swift motion, Tsuna passed the ball to Nijimura, who had now regained his composure. Fukuda Soo players rallied around their captain, ready to support him. But Tsuna didn't stop there. He made a beeline for the basket, and Silver, realizing Tsuna's intention, cursed under his breath as he gave chase. As expected by Silver, Nijimura swiftly lobbed the ball toward the basket, aiming for Tsuna. Tsuna leaped into the air to claim it. "I will not let you do it easily." With determination in his eyes, Silver jumped as well, aiming to block Tsuna's shot. Tsuna smiled serenely as he hung in midair, clutching the ball. He understood that Silver's taller frame gave him an advantage in such situations. however. Suna closed his eyes and found himself standing before a monumental set of doors in his conscious mind. When he approached, the grand doors swung open, almost as if they were expecting him, revealing a realm he was about to enter as an honored guest. As he opened his eyes, Suna's gaze seemed to smolder with an intense determination. Dark sparks crackled within his eyes as he faced Silver's imposing block head-on, soaring through the air. The basketball firmly gripped in Suna's hand met Silver's outstretched fingers. Silver, brimming with confidence, expected to deny Suna's attempt to dunk. But shock coursed through him as he realized that Suna's strength surpassed his own. Silver's mouth gaped in disbelief as Suna forcefully, and with overpowering force, slammed the ball through the hoop. Silver gazed up at Suna, who was briefly suspended in the air before landing gracefully. Suna extended a hand and asked, "Need a hand, Jason?" Without even thinking, Silver accepted the offer and rose to his feet. His expression was a mix of amazement and surprise. He watched Suna as the guy shook his head and returned to his team. As Suna walked away, Silver couldn't help but mutter to himself, "He's an absolute monster." All the players on the Jabberwock team were in a state of shock, their eyes wide open in disbelief. Silver was their strongest in terms of physical strength, yet Suna had managed to bypass his block, which seemed nothing short of madness. Suna continued to walk with his team, sensing an odd atmosphere. He noticed that his teammates were avoiding eye contact, appearing somewhat embarrassed. "Why the long faces?" Suna inquired. Every one of them remained silent, sharing uneasy glances with one another. Suna was perplexed by their reaction. They were grown adults, yet their behavior was quite childlike. "All right, let's try to score a bit more," Suna suggested, glancing at the scoreboard. The rest of the team also turned their attention to it, which displayed a score of 2-46, an absolute lead for the Jabberwock. Rather than feeling hopeless, a newfound determination swelled within them. They set a goal to score at least 10 more points. Suna nodded, acknowledging their determination. The game resumed, with Nash dribbling the ball while gazing thoughtfully in Suna's direction. Nash couldn't believe his eyes as he observed Suna's incredible performance. Zone? When did he learn to do that? He wondered silently. When Suna executed a remarkable dunk, revelation dawned upon Nash. His anger flared up, and he muttered, "He's capable of scoring on his own," but he was intentionally holding back. Nash came to a sudden realization that Suna's solo performance wasn't about scoring points. Instead, he was strategically buying time and putting on a show for his teammates, motivating them to rise against the overpowering strength of the Jabberwock. Nash couldn't help but express his disbelief. "This guy's out of his mind," he mumbled. While Suna had informed Nash of his intentions to use the Jabberwock to thoroughly defeat Fukuda Soo, Nash was still taken aback by Tsuna's ability to maintain control over the game, even in these circumstances. It didn't sit well with Nash's own pride. With a commanding gesture, he directed his team to continue playing. "As I thought, someone with that level of ambition definitely needs to have such guts," he reflected. As Nash moved ahead, the Fukuda Soo players stood their ground, their determination evident in their resolute stances. Tsuna's eyes sparked with dark streaks, held a pleased expression. He said, "Well done. It would have been a waste if you all had gone down so easily." Suna felt satisfaction in the success of his gamble this time. His gaze then shifted to Agiwara, and his eyes glinted with a hint of something deeper as he confirmed something. As the intense basketball game pressed on in a distinctly different part of Japan, Shizuoka, a red-haired teenager, strolled purposefully down a street, heading towards a specific school in the area. As Kagami entered Fukuda Soo Academy, he couldn't help but mutter, "This must be where Alex works." But his confidence waned when he noticed a group of students who, while not dressed like typical delinquents, had an intimidating aura. He looked around with a hint of nervousness, wondering if he had stumbled into some kind of trouble. A student who appeared to be the leader of the group stepped forward and barked, "Why the hell are you in our school, you moron?" Kagami's anxiety grew as these intimidating individuals surrounded him. He stuttered, "I'm here to find Alex." Upon mentioning Alex's name, the mood among the students shifted suddenly, leaving Kagami startled. The leader shook his head dismissively and raised his hand, commanding, "Looks like we've got another one vying for her attention. Let's teach him a lesson he won't forget." "Ooh!" A chorus of agreement erupted from the group as they charged toward Kagami. Panic washed over him as he realized what was happening. Ever since Alexandra had arrived at their school, situations like this had become all too common. It seemed like a routine for these students to make examples out of anyone who dared to approach their foreign basketball coach. Wait, hold on. I'm one of her students. Kagami's plea was drowned out by the mob of students converging on him. He was quickly overwhelmed, subjected to a barrage of blows as he exclaimed, "What's wrong with this place?" Chapter 113, Chapter 111, Meeting with an Influential Figure. The court echoed with the screech of sneakers and the constant thud of the ball until the referee finally blew the whistle, marking the end of the match. As the whistle sounded, the Fukuda Soo players, completely exhausted, collapsed onto the court. They couldn't hide their fatigue and frustration as they gazed at the scoreboard, which displayed a lopsided score of 10-65. It had been a short game, but the Jabberwock had effortlessly dominated them. Without Tsuna, who had single-handedly scored all of their points, their side of the scoreboard would have remained blank. Tsuna stood alone on the Fukuda Soo side while all players from the Jabberwock stood strong as they fixed their gazes on him with a mix of astonishment and determination. Nash walked over to Tsuna, gazing at the exhausted Fukuda Soo players strewn across the court. They were all trying to catch their breath after the intense match. Nash remarked, "I did mention they wouldn't stand a chance." "I know the Jabberwock is formidable," Tsuna responded. He shook his head as he inquired, "What's your plan after this?" Nash scratched his head and glanced at his team members before refocusing on Tsuna. "I think we're done with today's training, so I'll stick around for a bit, maybe chat with our coach and the manager." "I appreciate the game," Tsuna expressed his gratitude. Nash chuckled, "No problem, we had a fun time." "All right, they'll be hanging around for a while. Make sure they're comfortable," Tsuna instructed, gesturing toward the Fukuda Soo players. He strolled away from the court, adding, "I've got another meeting to attend. Catch you later." Nash nodded, rejoining his teammates, and they headed back to their accommodations, conveniently provided since Tsuna had taken charge of their team. Tsuna directed Nijimura to assist the others in getting settled before departing with Sabas. As he peered out of the car window, Tsuna's eyes locked onto the well-known cityscape and streets of Los Angeles. A nostalgic smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Even though it might not be considered the finest place, this city held the essence of his hometown, and that alone filled him with a sense of comfort and warmth. Sabas smiled as he glanced at Tsuna through the rearview mirror of the car. "You appear to be in good spirits, young master." Tsuna smiled back and replied, "You caught that, hey?" Shaking his head, Sabas, who had been with Tsuna for a long time, could distinguish between Tsuna's genuine happiness and his professional demeanor. Sabas inquired, "I'm curious, young master. What brought about this cheerful mood?" Tsuna chuckled at Sabas' curiosity and turned his gaze to the passing cityscape outside the car window. He relished the view before answering, "Let's just say I hit the jackpot in my little gamble this time." Finishing his sentence with a smirk, Tsuna's expression hinted that everything had gone exactly as he had planned or even better. Sabas joined in the laughter, recognizing that this confident grin meant that Tsuna's scheme had been a resounding success. Inside a lavish mansion, the luxurious furnishings and ornate decorations were clear indicators of affluence and power. Seated in this grandeur, a well-built and commanding middle-aged man sat across from another man of similar age, both gathered around a round table in an elegantly adorned room. Laughter resounded from his companion, filling the room. Hirutora furrowed his brows as he took a sip of his wine and inquired, "What's so funny, Bill? Why the sudden laughter?" Bill, also known as Mr. Door, halted his laughter and fixed a smile on his face as he looked at Hirutora. "Tora, you really have an exceptional son." Hirutora's brow furrowed even more as he struggled to comprehend the situation. Orange Company and Macrohard Corporation had been locked in rivalry for an extensive period, long before their child's marriage united them. Their rivalry had been enduring, and their familiarity with each other exceeded that of even their closest friends and family. So Mr. Door's unexpected appearance was baffling. He had arrived at their doorstep, claiming that his youngest child had urged him to do so, which, considering their standings, seemed highly improbable. "You must be perplexed, but isn't it fascinating?" Mr. Door chuckled heartily, finding amusement in the situation. "Many folks approach me seeking a slice of the pie, but your son had the audacity to invite me over while offering a whole pie." Mr. Door's laughter continued as he commented, "Ha ha ha, not even your eldest displayed such audacity." It had been quite a while since Mr. Door had encountered someone as intriguing as Hirutora's youngest son, so he eagerly anticipated hearing what the young man had to offer. Hirutora studied Mr. Door attentively. To pique Bill's interest, Suna must have offered something substantial, Hiratora contemplated quietly as he observed Mr. Door. For a person like Mr. Door, being intrigued by something meant it could bring significant advantages to the company. This left Hiratora puzzled, as he couldn't fathom why Tsuna would present it to Mr. Door instead of keeping it within the family. Even though they were connected through marriage, family should always come first, and Hiratora firmly believed in this principle. Tsuna, not being your typical heir to a conglomerate, was expected to understand this well. Hiratora looked forward to hearing Tsuna's explanation for his actions this time. The two engaged in some small talk until the door swung open, and their faces lit up with anticipation as they saw who was entering. It was Tsuna, dressed in formal attire. Ahaha, the star of today's meeting has finally graced us with his presence, Mr. Door remarked with a jovial laugh. Tsuna greeted them with a smile, followed by a respectful bow towards his father, who acknowledged it with a nod. He then took a seat at the round table among these influential individuals. Hiratora observed Tsuna's calm demeanor and noticed the confidence radiating from him. This filled him with satisfaction, and a subtle smile formed on his lips. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Door. I assume you're intrigued by my proposal, Tsuna said calmly. Mr. Door's eyes brightened as he noticed Tsuna's deliberate choice, not to mention being late, recognizing it as a subtle power move in the negotiations. He thought, impressive, a way to assert your dominance at the negotiation table, indeed. Quite thoughtful. Mr. Door smiled slightly and responded, no need for such formality, Tsuna. You're practically family. Tsuna maintained a polite tone but added a touch of slyness, oh, Mr. Door, I wouldn't dream of it. I'm not on your level, yet. His eyes sparkled with confidence. Mr. Door burst into laughter. He tried to establish a hierarchical advantage by saying these words, but Tsuna had skillfully sidestepped it, retaining the upper hand. And not on the same level yet, you say? Mr. Door's eyes gleamed at this. The audacity. The confidence. Mr. Door recognized that Tsuna was not a fledgling dragon. He was a fully grown dragon. As Hiratora couldn't conceal his satisfied grin, Mr. Door couldn't help but envy the man's blessed luck to have such a child. If only Tsuna were his own child, life would be much easier. After a hearty laugh, Mr. Door became solemn, resting his chin on his hand, and asked, let's find out if what you've brought to the table is worth my precious time. Tsuna smiled as he reached for a folder, catching everyone's attention, and its title read, Macro Hard Surface Concept. Chapter 114, Chapter 112, Excited for the Winter Cup. Back in Japan, Kagami had taken quite a beating, leaving him battered and bruised. His mouth was tightly sealed with some sort of tape to keep him from talking, but he continued to insist that he was a student of Alexandra with his stare. The members of Fukuda Soo Academy's student union were restraining Kagami, preventing him from making any sudden moves. The vice leader of the student union, temporarily overseeing things in Najimura's absence, wore a disapproving frown as he observed Kagami's unyielding stare. Vice leader, I think he might actually be telling the truth, one of the student union members who had taken part in beating Kagami said hesitantly. It was unusual for someone to be as persistent as Kagami. Typically, those who were on the receiving end of such a beating would have left immediately. This made him wonder if there was some truth to Kagami's claims. The vice leader let out a deep sigh and shook his head in response. I had my doubts, too, but we cannot verify this ourselves. Why don't we ask the basketball club members? One of the students in the group suggested, tilting his head in confusion. The vice leader sighed once more and replied, that's the issue. The ones who stayed behind likely aren't the regular members. They might be unaware of this guy's connection with Mrs. Garcia. Upon hearing this, Kagami's eyes suddenly widened as he realized something. He began to wriggle his body frantically and muffled a scream from behind the tape. The group exchanged glances, and the vice leader signaled to one of his members to remove the tape from Kagami's mouth. Once Kagami could speak, he desperately inquired, hey, what do you mean by that? Did they leave or something? The vice leader nodded in response, saying, yeah, their captain took them to the US for some special training or something. So, we have no way of confirming the truth without them now. Hearing this, Kagami's eyes slowly lost their color as he felt like he was being toyed with. So, I've come all this way for nothing, Kagami muttered helplessly. Witnessing Kagami's dejected look, the vice leader couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He signaled to the others to release Kagami, who remained motionless even after being set free. The vice leader hesitated but then decided to pull out his phone. He muttered to himself, should I call him? Nijimura had instructed him to reach out if anything important came up. Though he was uncertain if asking for someone's identity was important enough, he figured it was worth a try. It was still around 10 a.m. in Japan, so Nijimura should be available for a call in the US. Gazing at Kagami's lifeless expression, the vice leader steeled himself and pressed the call button for Nijimura's number. In the corner of Tokyo, nestled among the urban landscape, lay a public basketball court. The rhythmic symphony of the bouncing ball, harmonized with the melodious squeak of sneakers against the polished concrete, resonated in the air. Amidst this urban backdrop, a dark blue-haired teenager showcased a remarkable display of skill and agility. With an excited grin that seemed to paint itself across his face, he dribbled the basketball effortlessly with such precision. Akin. I get that you're hyped for the Winter Cup, and it's awesome that you've gotten back into serious training, but ditching school is not the way to go, you knucklehead. Momwa was giving Akin a stern talking to. She wore an irritated expression, her cheeks puffed out in frustration. She was clearly exasperated. While she was happy to see Akin rediscover his passion for basketball and work hard, she hadn't anticipated he'd be so pumped that he'd start skipping school for it. Even though Coach Harasawa appeared to tolerate it, Momwa couldn't help but feel frustrated by Akin's frequent school absences. But her scolding seemed to have no effect on Akin. He dribbled the basketball enthusiastically, moving like he was up against a formidable adversary. Quit bugging me, Satsuki. I'm getting excited. Akin retorted with a grin. He closed his eyes and visualized Tsuna as his imaginary opponent, fully immersed in the game. Following his defeats against Tsuna, Akin threw himself wholeheartedly into training, often pushing himself to his limits. Despite nursing persistent aches and injuries from their fierce battles, he was unwavering in his determination. The pain in his muscles was a constant reminder, fueling his conviction that he would emerge even stronger once these physical discomforts subsided. In his imaginary world, Akin could see the same Tsuna he faced during the inter-high, with his usual smirk as if everything was under his control, effortlessly put up a perfect defensive form that didn't have a slight opening. Akin's grin widened as he accelerated his dribbling, relentlessly probing for openings in Tsuna's defense. He expertly crossed over to the right, maintaining his momentum as he rotated his body in that direction. He executed a powerful rightward leap to deliver an unconventional, forceful shot that swished through the basket. After Akin's shot, the basketball bounced on the court, and he paused to take a deep breath, closing his eyes. In his mind, Akin's excitement surged as he imagined Tsuna standing there, unfazed by his shot. You truly are something, Tsuna, Akin muttered to his imaginary opponent. Within his vivid imagination, he could see Tsuna's disappointed expression, reminiscent of the look he had given Akin when the guy had declared him unworthy. Yet, while Akin was caught up in his intense training, Momwa was focused on a different task. She was reviewing Akin's previous performance data and couldn't help but be thoroughly impressed by his rapid improvement. As she analyzed the data, she couldn't shake the thought that Akin hadn't even reached his peak yet. In addition to her concerns about Akin skipping school, another reason she had been assigned to observe his training was to ensure he didn't overexert himself due to his excitement and to monitor his progress. Momwa took her role seriously, her eyes fixed on Akin's every move as she continued her analysis. With gratitude in her heart, Momwa watched Akin's intense training. She couldn't help but think, thanks to Tsuna, Akin will undoubtedly reach his peak or even beyond by the time the Winter Cup begins. She kept her careful eye on Akin as he retrieved the basketball, his gaze now more focused and calculating. It was clear that Akin was gearing up for another round of one-on-one in his imaginary match. However, as he continued his way, Akin suddenly stopped in his tracks, gazing down at his worn-out shoes. It was evident that his intense training had taken a toll on his footwear. He muttered to himself, guess it's time for a new pair of shoes. In the US, Nijimura found himself in their changing room, wiping the sweat from his face with a fresh towel provided by Jabberwock's management staff. As he glanced around, he noticed that everyone else in the room had succumbed to their exhaustion and fallen asleep. Nijimura couldn't help but chuckle as he reflected on their game against the formidable Jabberwock team. Despite their overwhelming physical and mental fatigue, they were determined to continue training after the match, driven by the realization that they didn't want to be a burden to Tsuna. He couldn't help but think, Tsuna must have anticipated all of this as he had changed our diet even before our arrival to the US. Just then, Nijimura's phone rang, breaking the silence in the room. Curious and somewhat surprised, Nijimura glanced at the caller ID and saw it was the vice leader of the student union. Puzzled by the timing, he answered the call. "Hello? Vice leader, what's up?" Nijimura inquired. Chapter 115, Chapter 113, title at the end of the chapter. Hiratora had a frown on his face as he examined the file he was holding. In contrast, Mr. Dorr had a different reaction. His eyes lit up with excitement as he examined the file with great interest. "So, what's your asking price for this?" Mr. Dorr asked directly. No more beating around the bush as he was eager to get his hands on it. Suna had a sly grin and said with a knowing look, "I'd like to have 5% of the Macrohard shares under my company, the Sovereign Group." Upon hearing this, Mr. Dorr fell silent and furrowed his brows. "Do you realize how much 5% of those shares is worth?" And it didn't end there. Mr. Dorr suddenly became more alert when Tsuna dropped the company's name. The name surprised him, and he looked startled at Hiratora, who seemed quite unfazed by the revelation. "Does he know about all of this, too?" Mr. Dorr asked with a puzzled expression. Tsuna nodded and replied calmly, "I'm well aware of the value, but just think about the tremendous boost this product could give your company when it hits the market. That 5% is a drop in the bucket compared to its potential worth." As Tsuna remembered, in his previous world, the product's release had led to a consistent increase in the stock price, so he had full confidence in its ability to make a significant impact on the company's current situation. Plus, Tsuna was aware that Macrohard stock had been on a steady decline all year. Introducing a product like this could easily reverse that trend. So, in the grand scheme of things, that 5% of shares was really a small price to pay for the long-term gains it could bring to the company. Tsuna also pointed out that they were allies now, and having a similar top-notch product on the market would boost their competitiveness. This, in turn, would help them secure a larger share of the market since they were both industry giants. Even though they were rivals despite being allies, Tsuna believed that a prolonged competition would ultimately help them both become long-term industry leaders. "I get it now. Rather than facing off against some random group, it's smarter to compete with our own folks, right?" Hiratora nodded in agreement, understanding why Tsuna shared the product concept with Mr. Dorr instead of keeping it to his family. Mr. Dorr couldn't help but frown even more as he remembered a particular company that had been steadily amassing its shares in the stock market. He gazed directly at Tsuna and asked, "So, you're the one behind the Sovereign Group?" Mr. Dorr had been getting reports about an asset management fund firm steadily buying up shares of their group. What really caught his attention was that they were also acquiring shares globally, even in companies like Orange. He also spotted some investments in a small company, and what amazed him was that within a year, their investment had multiplied many times over. As he looked at the data, he was stunned to see that this group had never made a single investment mistake, which seemed unbelievable to him. These guys had a flawless track record in their investment decisions. To his shock, the person behind the company was right before him. It turned out to be Tsunayoshi Kazama, the youngest heir of the Kazama Group who owned the Orange Company. Tsuna's smile grew even broader as he nodded. Mr. Dorr turned to Hiratora and asked, "Did you know about this?" Hiratora calmly sipped his wine and then glanced at Tsuna as he explained, "That's right. Tsuna is set to own 7% of the Kazama Group's shares in the future. Still, he plans to transfer that ownership to the Sovereign Group, which is currently a separate entity and will become his once he reaches the legal age." Mr. Dorr was puzzled by Hiratora's decision to let Tsuna go his own way. He couldn't quite grasp the reasoning behind it. In addition, Mr. Dorr was also confused about why Tsuna wanted to go his own way. So, he turned to Tsuna and asked, "What's the reason behind this?" Tsuna gazed at Mr. Dorr and then turned to his father as he explained, "My brother will be more than capable of taking care of the group." Tsuna recognized that their group was already sizable, but he had a gleam in his eye, eager for more. "I also think BlackRock and Vanguard have been a bit too lonely at the summit. Why not keep them company up there?" Tsuna stated with his signature smirk, his gaze returning to Mr. Dorr. Mr. Dorr's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. BlackRock and Vanguard were asset management firms that held a substantial number of shares in S&P 500 listed companies. Their combined assets were nearly worth half of the total value of all shares from companies in the S&P 500. Their company was indeed a global heavyweight, but when it came to assets, they couldn't hold a candle to these two management firms. Could it be that this young teenager standing before him had a more voracious appetite for success than his family's group, which was already a global giant? Mr. Dorr burst into laughter, unable to contain himself. "Ha ha ha, You're spot on. They've been pretty lonely up there at the top. It's about time for another powerhouse to join the party. He exclaimed enthusiastically. Hirutora couldn't help but chuckle along with the others. Mr. Door laughed for a while before he finally asked, "All right, as the future competitor to BlackRock and Vanguard, how about I offer you 7%? That extra 2% was his way of showing goodwill to Tsuna. It was his way of expressing full support for Tsuna's goal to reach the top. It was like an initial investment that might bring back significant returns in the future. Nevertheless, Tsuna disagreed and said, "No, 5% is plenty." After all, his group had been steadily buying up macrohard stock in recent years. Mr. Door looked a bit puzzled, but Tsuna had a grin on his face as he added, "So, instead of giving me an extra 2%, I'd prefer you to do me another favor." Mr. Door raised his eyebrows and motioned for Tsuna to go on. "Have you ever considered owning an NBA team?" Mr. Door was a bit puzzled, replying, "What do you mean?" He couldn't figure out how an NBA team fit into their discussion. Tsuna smiled and clarified, "That's precisely what I mean. I'd like you to purchase an NBA team for me. You can certainly buy those teams by yourself or even ask your father for something like that," Mr. Door said thoughtfully, placing his hand on his chin. Then, he turned to Tsuna with curiosity in his eyes and asked, "So, why me?" Tsuna chuckled and explained, "Well, if I or my family buy the team, I won't be able to play as a player, will I?" "What did you just say?" Mr. Door couldn't believe his ears, turning to Hirutora and asking, "Did you catch what he's saying, Tora?" "Yeah, he mentioned this to me before." Hirutora let out a sigh, knowing exactly what Tsuna had in mind. "All right, you've got a free hand to do whatever you like, bring in new folks, coaches, or management staff. I just don't want to make a poor investment," Mr. Door said with a hint of exasperation, rubbing his temple. Mr. Door let out another sigh, looking somewhat tired, and asked, "So, which team should I look into buying?" Tsuna nodded and then inquired, "Excellent. Have you ever come across the Silver State Warriors?" Mr. Door looked a bit puzzled because he didn't recognize that team as one of the NBA's top 5. Seeing Mr. Door's confusion, Tsuna confidently said, "I get that it might not be a top team in the NBA right now, but I promise you that within 4 years, I'll make it a top contender." Mr. Door nodded and asked, "Okay, should I also change the team's name?" Tsuna paused momentarily, then broke into a wide grin and said, "Yes, please do. Change it to the Golden State Warriors." Title: Rise of the Golden State Warriors. Chapter 116, Chapter 114, The End of the Special Training. Alexandra was casually observing a streetball game that was unfolding right before her eyes. She had accompanied Tsuna back to the United States, although her assistance was rarely required by Fukuda Soo. As a result, she often found herself returning to her roots and spending her time here. In the streetball court, a red-haired teenager was sweating as he skillfully dribbled the basketball. "Come on, Taiga. You've gotten slower," one of his teammates teased in a playful manner. Kagami scowled, snapping back, "Shut up, Kevin." His face bore visible bruises, remnants of his altercation with members of the student union at Fukuda Soo Academy. After receiving a call from the vice leader, who informed him that Alexandra had returned to the US with the regular team members of Fukuda Soo for intensive training, Kagami quickly booked a flight to the US. He was determined to meet Alexandra and seek her guidance. In the game, Kagami paused to take a deep breath, remembering Alexandra's advice, "Relax your form and keep an open mind. Feel your surroundings." He mumbled those words before refocusing, fixing his gaze on the opponent. His expression was composed as he deftly dribbled the ball between his legs and behind his back, then made a rapid crossover to the left. This unexpected change of pace left his opponent bewildered. Witnessing their teammates struggle, the opponent's teammates rushed to help. Nonetheless, Kagami remained composed, expertly breaking through their defense before soaring into the air for a powerful dunk. As Kagami slammed the ball into the basket, the crowd cheered. Kevin, who had playfully teased Kagami earlier, gave him a hearty pat on the shoulder and exclaimed, "That's what I'm talking about, man. Let's go." Kagami simply shook his head with a wry smile as the game pressed on. On the sidelines, Alexandra nodded in approval of Kagami's progress. "He certainly has plenty of potential left to unlock," Alexandra noted, her eyes fixed on Kagami, who had become the center of attention on the court. With confidence in Kagami's potential, Alexandra believed he could have a better chance of winning against the Generation of Miracles if he kept up his current pace. However, she couldn't help but think of Tsuna, and a slight doubt crept into her. Still, I'm not sure if you'd be able to face such a monster, Taiga, she pondered silently. In a contemporary gymnasium, two groups of teenagers, one in dark green lined jerseys and the other in red and black lined jerseys, were locked in a fierce basketball match. The teens in red and black found themselves in a challenging situation as their opponents in dark green appeared to dominate the game. Nash frowned as he dribbled the basketball alongside Hizaki while Agiwara closely guarded his every move. Breaking through their defense wasn't particularly challenging for Nash. Still, he couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling caused by the curious and intense stares he received from the Fukuda Soo players. It wasn't limited to just the two players before him, it seemed like the entire Fukuda Soo team shared these peculiar gazes. Nash silently wondered, what kind of sorcery did he exert on them to make them act like this? He directed his gaze at Tsuna, who appeared the most composed among his teammates. The Jabberwock team had been consistently winning their games against Fukuda Soo. However, Nash couldn't help but notice that Fukuda Soo scored more points with each subsequent match. Their initial score of 10 on their first day gradually increased. While the Jabberwock still maintained control of the game, it was evident that Fukuda Soo had made remarkable progress in just a short span of time. Nash expressed frustration with a click of his tongue as he effortlessly bypassed Hizaki and Agiwara's defensive efforts, pushing forward toward Fukuda Soo's defensive line. Nijimura quickly moved to support Nash, but instead of going for a shot himself, Nash made a pass to Silver. Silver received the ball with remarkable composure, starkly contrasting his usual behavior of taunting opponents. Initially, Silver had been taunting the Fukuda Soo players continuously. However, he soon grasped the futility of it. The opposing team seemed undeterred as if possessed, relentlessly challenging him despite being like ants in his presence. Silver had always reveled in the sight of his opponent's despair, but something about these Fukuda Soo players was different. He found their unwavering determination uninteresting. Silver's attempt to dunk the ball was met with unexpected resistance from Tsuna, who had quickly positioned himself to block the shot. Everyone watched as Fukuda Soo seized the ball after Tsuna's block. With the ball now in his hands, Tsuna wasted no time and darted forward. Silver, determined to redeem himself, chased closely behind. Zack and Alan, Silver's teammates, moved in to thwart Tsuna's progress. Though Tsuna managed to slip past their defense, it gave Silver enough time to catch up. His towering presence stood between Tsuna and the basket, poised to halt Tsuna's advance. Tsuna maintained a calm smile and decided to take a step back for a shot. This surprised Silver, but he reacted swiftly, attempting to block the shot. However, Tsuna had something else in mind. As Silver leaped into the air to block the shot, Tsuna skillfully passed the ball by bouncing it through Silver's outstretched form. Mochizuki, fully prepared, nodded and declared, "All right." He leaped into action, taking aim at the basket. "You think I'd let you do as you wish?" However, his concentration was disrupted by a voice. Nash had appeared before him, predicting their moves with remarkable precision. He jumped to block Mochizuki's shot. Mochizuki remained steadfast and released the ball, much to Nash's surprise. The ball somehow managed to evade Nash's outstretched hand, leaving him baffled. Upon seeing the ball's trajectory, Nash grasped the situation. Tsuna was swiftly closing in on the ball, leaping into the air, snatching it, and executing a slam dunk. He briefly hung from the rim before gracefully landing. Nash shook his head in amazement and shifted his gaze to the scoreboard, which displayed their typical commanding lead of 59-21. Nash noticed that compared to their first encounter with a score of 10-65, their performance had improved significantly. Tsuna didn't even enter the zone anymore after their initial match, and this had Nash excited. He wanted to see Tsuna give it his all, but it was the last day of their training together. Unfortunate, hey. Approaching Tsuna, Nash extended his hand for a handshake. "I suppose you'll be heading back to Japan tomorrow." Tsuna nodded and shook Nash's hand firmly. He then turned to his teammates, who appeared frustrated by the scoreboard. Tsuna smiled, sensing their determination. "Plus, I've accomplished my goals of returning to the US. It's time to head back." Chapter 117, Chapter 115, Breaking Through the Door. Upon their return to Japan, Fukuda Soo resumed their regular training routine with newfound determination. Especially since the Winter Cup was just around the corner, and the preliminary rounds were set to commence today. As reigning Inter-High champions, they had secured a reserved place in the Winter Cup alongside the other top 4 teams from the Inter-High. Suna watched them, a contented smile on his face. They seem like entirely different people, don't they? Nijimura remarked as he passed Suna a fresh towel. Suna took the towel and replied with composure, they should be. They're pretty hungry now. Nijimura nodded silently, understanding the sentiment. He, too, felt the unpleasantness of losing. They had experienced it firsthand, repeatedly, during the week of relentless defeats against the Jabberwock. Suna said, if there's nothing else, I'll be on my way. I'll leave them in your hands, Shozo. He had a prior commitment and needed to leave early. However, Nijimura had a strong hunch that Suna would continue training at home. Just a gut feeling, but after our special training. Nijimura thought to himself. A sense of foreboding crept over him as he added, it seems like Suna is the hungriest of all of us. No, he's always been like that, Nijimura reflected. After their devastating loss, a harsh but much-needed reality check, they experienced an insatiable craving for victory. This deep-seated hunger sharpened their senses, creating a shared instinct to win. And for the first time, as they watched Suna's unwavering calmness, it seemed as though no adversity could disturb his tranquility. They felt something. A peculiar sensation washed over them, a feeling akin to their relentless hunger but even more potent, sending shivers down their spines. It wasn't merely the desire to win but a burning passion that transcended the thirst for victory. Nijimura muttered to himself, it seems like he's had this burning desire for a very long time. What could Suna possibly desire when he already had everything as the youngest heir of a conglomerate? Watching Suna walk away, Nijimura couldn't help but wonder, what is it that you desired so strongly, Suna? In the bustling heart of Tokyo, an eager and boisterous crowd descended upon a sprawling gymnasium. This was the battleground for the preliminary rounds of the highly anticipated Winter Cup. To Academy was just a short walk away, so Imiyoshi and Sakurai decided to attend the game. Sakurai followed behind Imiyoshi, inquiring, any predictions on who will win between Sirin and Jose? It's a tough call. Imiyoshi, wearing his typical relaxed smile with half-closed eyes, replied, both teams are strong, so it's anyone's game. Imiyoshi and Sakurai entered the gymnasium and were taken aback to see Sirin taking the lead in the game. Sirin's up against Jose, which should be a tough matchup, Imiyoshi remarked, his words slow as he closely watched the game unfold. But it looks like they've leveled up since we last saw them, he added, his attention drawn to Teppei Kiyoshi on the court. Kiyoshi, one of the uncrowned kings, had returned to the fray. It wasn't just him, every player on Sirin's team had shown significant improvement. Sakurai, equally astonished, commented, it appears Jose's center didn't give them the upper hand against Sirin. Imiyoshi nodded in agreement and watched Kiyoshi on the court. I'm glad we decided to come watch today, he said. The team had shown remarkable progress in a relatively short time. Although it was hard to admit, they were no longer an easy opponent. Imiyoshi pondered silently, except for 2, of course. While Sirin had shown considerable improvement, Imiyoshi believed that if they faced 2 again, it wouldn't make a significant difference. His smile faded slightly as he squinted, reflecting on Ayamine's remarkable progress over the past week. Imiyoshi couldn't help but think, Ayamine has grown much stronger. Even the current Sirin would likely be no match for him. Yet, Imiyoshi couldn't fathom that Kagami had also undergone substantial improvements, especially with the special training he received from Alexandra. Arg! Suddenly, a frustrated yell broke the moment. It was Kagami, and Hyuga smacked Kagami on the back of his head, prompting Kagami to shout, why? Hyuga adjusted his glasses and grumbled, you're way too excited, you idiot. He could see that Kagami was feeling both frustrated and excited, especially since Jose players constantly double-teamed him. However, this pressure should create openings in Jose's defense for their team to capitalize on. Captain's right, Kagami. You need to relax, Kuroko said, agreeing with Hyuga's advice. Hyuga grinned and said, absolutely. Time to get down to business, guys. Sirin's players shouted in unison, reinvigorated by Hyuga's words, as they swiftly moved into their positions. Observing the determined backs of his teammates, Kagami inhaled deeply to regain his composure. Yeah, that's right. I've got my team with me, Kagami murmured to himself, his face regaining its usual determined look. Kagami's renewed concentration allowed him to think more clearly as the game continued. Izuki, with a calm demeanor, dribbled the ball while scanning the court for opportunities. As he prepared to pass the ball to Kiyoshi, who had been a scoring force for their team, Izuki suddenly sensed something and quickly turned his attention to Kagami. He could feel the intensity of Kagami's desire for the ball, which caused him to break a sweat. Izuki hesitated momentarily, thinking, Kagami has struggled to break through their defense a few times. Despite this, he had an inexplicable feeling that Kagami was the best choice this time. Trusting his instincts, he made the pass to Kagami. Kagami grabbed the ball, taking a deep breath as he assessed the situation with two opposing players in front of him. With a burst of speed, he effortlessly pierced through their defense. Miyoshi and Sakurai watched in astonishment, their eyes wide with disbelief. He reminded me of Ayamine. Miyoshi couldn't help but draw a comparison to Ayamine, feeling the same rush of excitement as he watched Kagami soar into the air for a dunk. Who said I'll let you do it easily? Narumi, the star player from Jose, wouldn't allow Kagami's move to go unchallenged. He leaped into the air to block Kagami, but to his shock, he fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Kagami soared through the air, defying gravity and leaving Narumi in disbelief. The crowd, initially cheering, fell into a hushed awe as they witnessed Kagami's spectacular play. Then, as Kagami slammed the ball through the hoop with great force, the crowd erupted into enthusiastic cheers, captivated by the wonder of his dunk. Across Japan, the individuals known as the Generation of Miracles shifted their attention toward Tokyo. They had an instinctive feeling that someone was making a forceful entrance, breaching the barrier that separated them from ordinary people. In a traditional-style residence in Shizuoka, a black-haired teenager made a strategic move with his queen on a chessboard. He declared, "Checkmate." Facing Tsuna was a middle-aged man with red hair, and he wore a displeased expression upon losing the chess match. He grumbled, "Don't you think you should at least show some respect and lose on purpose to your elder, Tsunayoshi?" Tsuna shook his head in response, and the middle-aged man let out a disdainful snort. While the Generation of Miracles sensed an intrusion, Tsuna felt nothing, as he wasn't even there in the first place. He looked at the middle-aged man and inquired, "What brings you here, uncle?" The middle-aged man shook his head, "Can't I come to visit you? Besides, I heard my son suffered his first loss, albeit indirectly, so I need to see just how skilled the one who bested my precious child is." He was Jiro Akashi, Akashi's father, who sat before Tsuna. It wasn't a chess game, though, but whatever. Tsuna said with a squint in his eyes, "Now that I've defeated you, will your father be showing up tomorrow?" "My father has passed away." His response left Tsuna momentarily speechless. Jiro was definitely being intentional with that one. A moment of silence followed. Tsuna couldn't help but offer a wry smile at Jiro's unexpected and somewhat baffling personality. Chapter 118, Chapter 116, Shudoka vs Sirin. They both conversed about Jiro's visit to Shizuoka, during which he explained that he had a favor to ask of Tsuna's grandparents. Tsuna glanced at Jiro, shaking his head slightly. He and Jiro had a good relationship, certainly better than Akashi's relationship with Jiro. "He's just like many other Asian parents, isn't he?" Tsuna concluded, having met Jiro several times. Tsuna could completely relate to the situation. He had a profound understanding of Jiro's bond with his son, Jiro Akashi. This connection stemmed from Tsuna's previous life, during which he had misunderstood his parents much like Akashi did with his father. In his present life, things hadn't changed all that much. Hirutora was quite similar to Jiro in terms of being awkward and too reserved around their kids. However, Tsuna now had a better understanding of Hirutora's perspective, which went a long way in smoothing out any tension in their relationships. Still, Akashi's limited experience in dealing with such parents made him struggle to comprehend the rationale behind Jiro's actions, finding himself unintentionally viewing the situation from his own perspective alone. Tsuna, on the other hand, believed that Akashi would eventually come to understand, just as he himself had in his previous life. "It took me quite some time before I truly appreciated my parents' unconditional love," Tsuna reminisced, his eyes glinting with nostalgia. Tsuna reflected on his own brother, Jin Kazama, who bore some resemblance to Akashi in terms of their relationships with their fathers. However, thanks to their mother's influence, Jin had not turned out like Akashi. A privilege to which Akashi didn't fully enjoy, as his mother had passed away in the past. Watching Jiro, Tsuna recognized that he was not a cold-hearted person. He may have been stern and traditional, but his love was sincere. He had gone to great lengths to meet Tsuna in person just because his son's team had lost to Tsuna's team. It was evident that Jiro genuinely cared about Akashi, even if it was expressed in his own unique way. Suna sighed and shook his head. He couldn't help but think that Jiro's dedication to work might have been a way to cope with the loss of his wife, a distraction from the pain. This, however, had led to the neglect of his son, Seijuro Akashi, contributing to the way Akashi turned out. As their conversation came to an end, Jiro said his goodbyes and headed over to Tsuna's grandparents to bid his farewells to them as well. The following week marked the end of the Winter Cup's preliminary rounds, and the final league, which would determine the remaining teams for the actual tournament, was set. Fukuda Soo traveled to Tokyo to get ready for the upcoming competition. They were in a car heading to a bustling gymnasium where the final league would take place. Nijimura sat in the front seat beside Sabas, who was driving. He glanced at Tsuna, who occupied the passenger seat, and asked, "Why are you interested in checking out today's game?" "I had an unexpected visitor yesterday, so I'm curious to see what he's up to today," Tsuna explained, shifting his gaze from the passing scenery to Nijimura. Nijimura's eyes lit up with understanding. He recalled that Tsuna mentioned an interesting conversation with a visitor from the previous night. Upon reaching the gymnasium, they were greeted by a bustling crowd. The presence of the generation of miracles playing today had drawn a significant audience, which was hardly surprising. "It's really packed," Tsuna commented as he stepped out of the car unassisted. Sabas let out a resigned sigh. His role was to open the door for Tsuna, but it appeared Tsuna was eager to watch the game today. "Let's head in, Shuzo," Tsuna said, making his way toward the gymnasium entrance. Nijimura nodded and followed closely. Amidst the crowd, mostly composed of young teenagers, a blonde-haired teenager seemed to spot Tsuna and quietly muttered, "Isn't that Kazumaki?" "Ahaha, I suppose it's time for me to leave, guys," Kai said with a smile, bidding farewell to his fans before hurrying to catch up with Tsuna. By the time Tsuna and Nijimura reached the audience seats, the game was on the verge of starting. "Kazumaki. Senior Nijimura. Didn't think I'd bump into you guys here." A voice broke their attention, prompting Tsuna and Nijimura to turn around and find Kai's, who had just caught his breath after following them. "Ryota, hey? What brings you here?" Tsuna inquired before refocusing his attention on the court. "Haha, I'm here to watch Midorima play against Kuroko, of course." Kai's replied with enthusiasm. He moved to stand beside Tsuna and asked, "Besides, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you wouldn't be interested in watching their match." Tsuna chuckled and clarified, "Well, it's not like I'm here for the game itself. I'm here to confirm something." "Ah, I get it now," Kai said, even though he didn't entirely understand what Tsuna meant. The two of them engaged in a rapid-fire conversation, with Kai's bombarding Tsuna with questions. This barrage of inquiries left Nijimura scratching his head in annoyance. Nijimura couldn't help but wonder how Tsuna managed to stay so calm while fielding all of Kai's questions. On the court, both teams were ready to play. The Sirin team members noticed something different about Midorima compared to their previous encounters. "Wow, Midorima looks like a completely different person now," Kai's remarked, taken aback by Midorima's intense expression. Tsuna didn't react much to this observation. It wasn't unexpected. Midorima was a proud player who had suffered a loss against Sirin. Obviously, he would be taking this match seriously, even considering Kagami as his rival. The game began with both Shutoko and Sirin showing strong, fierce determination. They pressured each other, creating a tense standoff. Every time Midorima had the ball, Kagami leaped to block it with impressive ease. But to Kagami's bewilderment, Shutoko continued to pass the ball to Midorima, and Kagami had to defend his shots repeatedly. A perplexed expression crossed Kagami's face as he tried to make sense of Shutoko's strategy. Midorima noticed Kagami's confusion and decided to clarify, saying, "I don't have any new tricks, Kagami. All I've done so far had been an endurance training." However, he didn't let Kagami underestimate him. Midorima's demeanor shifted, emanating a different kind of intensity. Kagami felt somewhat surprised by the change in Midorima's presence. Midorima continued, "I'm sure you've noticed that I can't keep making those long shots forever. The same goes for your jumps," he declared with determination in his eyes, "so my task is straightforward. I'll keep shooting until you can't jump anymore." Kagami couldn't help but smirk in response. Midorima's challenge fueled his competitive spirit, and he let out a chuckle. "All right, bring it on, Midorima." Chapter 119, Chapter 117, Coming for Help. As the game progressed, Sirin managed to gain a lead in the score. Kagami, in particular, effectively disrupted Midorima's shooting attempts. However, Midorima adapted by incorporating feints and deceptive moves, forcing Kagami to expend more energy jumping to contest his shots. On the other hand, Kuroko encountered difficulties as Takao vigilantly tracked his every move with his sharp instincts. Despite the challenge, by the end of the first quarter, Sirin maintained their lead, with a score of 27-16 displayed on the scoreboard. Tsuna! A familiar voice called out, and Tsuna turned to see Momoa rushing towards him for a hug. He managed to brace himself in time to withstand her sudden embrace. He chuckled as he playfully flicked her forehead. "You surprised me." Momoa looked at him with an exaggeratedly hurt expression, rubbing her forehead. "Ah, why'd you do that? Don't do that again. What if I wasn't ready? We might both end up on the ground." Momoa pouted and responded, "But I knew you'd catch me." Tsuna let out a sigh. Ever since he had beaten akin and brought him back to training, Momoa had become exceptionally clingy. He didn't mind it too much, perhaps it was her way of showing gratitude. "So, who did you come with today?" Tsuna asked, with Momoa holding onto his right hand. "I'm with my team. They're right there." Momoa pointed to a section of the stadium, "and I saw you over here, so I came over to say hello." Tsuna turned to where she pointed and spotted the regulars from 2 Academy watching the game together. "I see," Tsuna replied. Then, noticing akin wasn't among them, he asked, "Daiki still training, hey?" Momoa smiled and nodded. "That's right. He's been incredibly dedicated to training." Kai's observed the scene with weary expressions as Tsuna and Momoa engaged in their own conversation. Nijimura seemed unfazed and even slightly amused by the situation. On the other hand, Kai's was a bit uncomfortable being ignored and couldn't resist chiming in. He raised his hand like an eager student in a classroom. "Excuse me, Momoa-iki. I'm here too," Kais said. Momoa turned her attention to Kais and tilted her head with surprise. "Oh, Kais, you're here too." Kais mumbled in a slightly dejected tone, "Well, it seems like I went unnoticed." Momoa, however, seemed to pay little attention to Kais as she quickly returned to conversing with Tsuna. Watching this unfold, Kais felt speechless and somewhat overlooked. He felt a pat on his shoulder from Nijimura, who was nodding at him, which brought Kais a sense of comfort. And Nijimura's nod seemed to convey that everything was fine. Sighing with acceptance, Kais nodded, and Nijimura responded with a satisfied smile before focusing back on the court. Tsuna shook his head in response to these interactions and shifted his focus back to the court as the second quarter of the game got underway. The second quarter unfolded much like the first, with Kagami continuing to shut down Midorima. Kuroko found himself challenged by Takao, and Kiyoshi, Sirin's center, made it difficult for other Shudoku players to score. Momoa commented on the situation, saying, "Kagami won't last long if they keep this up." Kais agreed, saying, "His improvement is evident. He's jumping higher than the last time I saw him play, but his stamina drains faster than Midorima's." Tsuna observed the game quietly from the sidelines. Sirin's coach, Aida, couldn't ignore the situation on the court any longer and called for a timeout. "We can't continue like this," Aida addressed the team. She then turned to Kiyoshi and said, "I need you to support Kagami." Kiyoshi agreed with a nod while Kagami took a quick drink of water on the sidelines. Kagami's eyes sparkled with excitement as he glanced at Midorima. Despite his fatigue, he was eager for the challenge. Kiyoshi opened up his mouth, which then surprised everyone by suggesting, "Coach, I think we should take Kuroko out as well." His comment grabbed the team's attention. Kuroko, even though hesitant, realized that with Takao closely guarding him, his misdirection wouldn't be as effective. He reluctantly nodded and said, "I agree with Senior Kiyoshi. It'll also allow me to prepare my new skill for the next quarter," Kuroko added with a firm gaze. Coach Aida acknowledged this and substituted Kuroko with Mitobe. On the other side, Shudoku remained composed despite the challenging situation. "It's about time." Nakatani, the coach of Shudoku, broke the silence, glancing at Midorima, who adjusted his glasses. The players from Shudoku nodded in agreement. Earlier in the changing room, Midorima had stated his intention to pass the ball and act as bait, which had been met with skepticism. However, witnessing Midorima's unwavering determination not to taste defeat again ignited their competitive spirit. They returned to the court with fiery determination in their eyes. As they stepped onto the court, Midorima felt an intense gaze from the audience and turned his head to identify the source of it. Suna, hey. Midorima mumbled and adjusted his glasses. So, you're here to watch, he commented, recalling their recent encounter the previous night. It had been late when Midorima informed his family of his plans to visit Suna. They were more than happy to provide a driver and a car for the trip. Upon reaching Tsuna's Tokyo residence, he found Tsuna seemingly ready to retire for the night. Shintaro? That's so unlike you to come over this late, Tsuna remarked, inviting him inside. They sat across from each other. Tsuna inquired, how did you know I was here? Midorima replied calmly, I have my sources. Besides that, considering Tsuna's meticulous nature, Midorima knew Tsuna would have ensured his team arrived in advance, giving them time to adjust to the new environment and be in top form. Tsuna nodded, deep in thought, resting his hand on his chin as he contemplated. So, what brings you here? Midorima initially remained silent but then let out a sigh, mustering the courage to ask, what is it like to enter a zone? Tsuna was taken aback by the question, his eyes widening slightly. Knowing Midorima's prideful nature, Tsuna found it surprising that Midorima had come to him late at night, seeking help. He observed Midorima's serious expression, silently thinking, he's matured, hey. The fact that, in the original canon, there was no mention of Midorima entering the zone or even showing interest in it made Tsuna put on his signature sly smirk. Midorima visibly flinched at Tsuna's expression, seemingly wondering if he had approached the wrong person for guidance. Chapter 120, Chapter 118, Putting Everything on the Line. Tsuna's face regained its usual composure, much to Midorima's relief. He then adjusted his glasses to get a grip. What do you think it takes to enter the zone? Midorima's brows furrowed as he hesitated before replying, you have to love basketball with all your heart. Tsuna couldn't help but chuckle at that, causing Midorima's frown to deepen. Are you mocking me, Tsuna? No, not at all, Tsuna reassured with a smile. His face was relaxed as he continued, your answer wasn't incorrect, but it's not the complete picture. This response only seemed to agitate Midorima, who retorted, then what's the right answer? Tsuna maintained his gentle smile and raised 3 fingers, then began to explain, there are 3 conditions for entering the zone. Midorima's once furrowed brow now reflected a deep seriousness as he paid close attention to Tsuna's words. The first condition, Tsuna began, his eyes showing a spark as he continued, when you enter the zone, it pushes your body to its limits and drains your stamina rapidly, reaching a certain threshold in technical skills and having a high level of physical capability is a must. He recalled exceptions like Amin, who could enter it effortlessly despite not being in top physical condition. However, for most, meeting this criterion was essential. Tsuna turned his gaze toward Midorima as if piecing together the puzzle of why Midorima couldn't enter the zone in the original story. It was because of his background. Midorima hailed from a traditional family deeply rooted in Japan's political landscape. Regardless of his personal preferences, he was destined to follow the same path and engage in politics. Deep inside, Midorima had come to terms with this reality and embraced his future. Unconditional love and unwavering passion for basketball are just vague terms to describe the qualifications for entering the zone, Tsuna explained to Midorima. Tsuna's smirk remained as he went on, the real terms for it boil down to whether you are ready to risk it all to secure victory or not. So, Shintaro, are you prepared to put everything on the line? Tsuna inquired, leaving Midorima deep in thought. Midorima pondered quietly, does that mean I must let go of everything else, hey? Sacrificing everything he held dear would contradict the values instilled by his family. It would directly oppose his parents' teachings. It wasn't a simple matter to let go of something that had become an integral part of who he was. Tsuna understood Midorima's internal struggle and saw it as the primary reason behind his inability to access the zone. Even though it wasn't explicitly addressed in the original story, no other explanation seemed fitting. Akashi's situation was unique, Tsuna thought silently, giving Midorima time to digest the information. He reflected on Akashi's deep connection to basketball, which stemmed from his profound love for his late mother. This love and obsession led Akashi to willingly forsake everything else in his life, all in pursuit of the one thing his mother had left behind. Midorima sighed and turned to Tsuna, curiosity in his eyes. Tsuna considered this momentarily before responding, you must understand your trigger. What was it that pushed you so far that you were ready to bet everything? Identifying that trigger is the key to unlocking your hidden potential and breaking through your limits. Midorima contemplated this revelation and mumbled to himself, so, it's like finding a key to a door, isn't it? Midorima was confident about meeting the first condition, but the second required deep contemplation. As for the third condition, he realized he needed to pass the second one before even thinking about it. Suna observed Midorima lost in thought with a smirk. Will he be able to break those chains and unlock that door? He knew that unless Midorima could let go of those inner chains, he would struggle against the current Kagami. Suna couldn't help but look forward to their upcoming game the following day. And what is your trigger, Suna? Midorima's question wiped the smirk from Suna's face. He paused, contemplating the idea of a trigger. My trigger? I've never really thought about it, Suna admitted, his brow furrowing in thought. Midorima found this puzzling. He had emphasized how important a trigger was for unlocking the door to the zone. How could Suna not know his own trigger? After a moment, Suna clarified, I don't really need to dwell on my trigger for the zone, I can enter that door at will. Suna's words held undeniable truth. From the start of his arrival in this world, Suna harbored a burning desire deep within his soul. It was a yearning that had accompanied him throughout his life in this new world, a passion that consumed him daily. Suna didn't need to contemplate his trigger because he lived it, breathed it, and carried it with him every moment of his life. It was a part of who he was, an unwavering flame that pushed him beyond his limits. Suna didn't have to actively search for a trigger because, in a sense, he was the embodiment of the trigger itself. The door to the zone was always open for him, almost as if it was eagerly inviting him in. You must be joking. Midorima's frown deepened as he couldn't believe what he was hearing. How is that even possible? Midorima questioned incredulously. But when he looked into Tsuna's earnest eyes, he couldn't help but be astonished. Considering Tsuna's unwavering character, it seemed highly likely that he was speaking the truth. Someone who could enter the zone at will? That's absurd. Midorima couldn't shake the memory of Najimura's astonished face the first time Tsuna entered the zone. He felt a nagging suspicion that Tsuna was keeping something hidden from everyone. Pushing aside his doubts, Midorima refocused on the ongoing game. Some things were beyond his comprehension, and dwelling on them wouldn't change anything. He focused on the Sirin players, particularly Kagami, who continued to thwart his shots. You called me arrogant, he glanced at Tsuna, who was gazing at him. He realized Tsuna was expecting something extraordinary from him, which he found a bit conceited. He frowned, but don't you think you're being pretty arrogant now, Tsuna? Am I some rare zoo animal you need to be impressed with? You're a crazy bastard. Still, if you're looking for a show, I'll give you one, Midorima muttered with a sly grin. Tension crackled between the Shutoku and Sirin players, and the crowd excitedly roared. Let's do this! Kagami and Midorima spoke simultaneously, and the game resumed. Chapter 121, Chapter 119, Calming Down. The game pressed on, and Takao dribbled the ball with Izuki in close pursuit. A sly grin played on Takao's face as he swiftly passed the ball to Midorima, their eyes locking in silent understanding. Midorima secured the ball and began his shooting motion, his eyes narrowing in focus. He also kept an eye on Kiyoshi, who stood ready to support Kagami, aware that this was exactly what Shutoku had been planning for. Should I jump now? Kagami contemplated as Midorima set up for his shot. Realizing that waiting would be too late, Kagami propelled himself upward with a powerful leap. Midorima smoothly sidestepped, maintaining distance from Kagami, and prepared for another shot. Kagami clenched his teeth while airborne and, as soon as he landed, leaped once more to block Midorima's shot from behind. Can't quite reach the ball, Kagami acknowledged, but he then let out a smirk as a figure suddenly leaped in front of Midorima, and Kagami exclaimed, Perfect timing, Senior Kiyoshi. No way I'm letting that happen. Kiyoshi exclaimed as he leaped to block Midorima's shot. Takao couldn't help but chuckle as he'd been waiting for this moment. Midorima had some hesitation initially, but then his determination took over. No more room for hesitation. When Midorima passed the ball to Takao, it caught everyone on Sirin off guard. Midorima passed the ball. Kagami muttered in disbelief. Even Kuroko was taken aback by what he'd just witnessed. Did you all just witness that? Midorima passed the ball. Kai's exclaimed, his disbelief evident on his face. He turned to Tsuna and the others, seeking confirmation. I must not be dreaming, right? Momoa and Nijimura shared in the surprise. But Tsuna remained unfazed, and Momoa couldn't help but ask, Tsuna, why aren't you surprised? Did you anticipate this? Tsuna shook his head, commenting, why should I be impressed? It's something he should have done a while ago. Nijimura understood Tsuna's perspective. Still, he was too accustomed to Tsuna's calculated thinking that even if Tsuna claimed to foresee this development, Nijimura wouldn't have the slightest doubt of it. But it's Midorima we're talking about. Kai's, however, appeared confused. Tsuna maintained his point. It doesn't matter who it is. While individual ability is important, basketball is fundamentally a team sport. He made eye contact with Momoa to emphasize his point. Momoa blushed, feeling slightly embarrassed, as she clearly grasped Tsuna's reference to Aomine, who had a reputation for playing for himself. That's quite surprising. I didn't expect you to say that. Kai's mumbled, his thoughts drifting to Kuroko. Kai's found the similarity between Tsuna and Kuroko rather intriguing. Tsuna observed Kai's surprised expression, understanding his reaction, before shifting his focus back to the court. The generation of miracles was undeniably exceptional, particularly within the realm of Japanese basketball. Despite the individual talents on the court, the superiority of their solo performances could only shine at this level. In high-level games, the importance of teamwork surpassed individual prowess, as every player was exceptionally skilled. Shadoko was gaining momentum, and Sirin faced challenges in their efforts to counter. Yet, just when Shadoko believed they had control of the quarter, the game took an unexpected turn. Sirin's players shared a meaningful look, and in a swift motion, Izuki passed the ball to Hyuga, and the whole team advanced together. Shadoko was caught off guard by this sudden burst of speed, prompting them to tighten their defense. However, Sirin's team was remarkably fast, swiftly advancing into Shotoko's half of the court. Hyuga passed the ball to Kiyoshi, who aimed for a dunk, and Atsubo leaped to block him. To everyone's surprise, Kiyoshi passed the ball to Kagami, who thunderously slammed it into the basket. Atsubo frowned at the clever maneuver. "Those sneaky tactics," he muttered. Takao expressed his frustration, "We were taking control, and they pulled out a new trick." "Unbelievable." Atsubo disagreed, "It's not a new tactic. This is how they really play." The game turned into a high-scoring battle as both teams kept racking up points, and the second quarter concluded with the score tied at 45-45. During the halftime break, Aida, Sirin's coach, observed that their up-tempo style was draining the players' energy rapidly. The players gulped down water bottles, their breaths heavy. Kagami realized the toll it was taking on him. He clenched his fist and noticed his trembling legs. "I can't beat Midorima by just leaping around aimlessly." As the halftime break drew close, Aida changed their strategy, preparing to unveil Kuroko's hidden move. Kuroko definitely wouldn't be out here without a trick up his sleeve. As both teams returned to the court, Midorima wore a thoughtful expression as he observed Kuroko rejoining the game. The game continued, and Shadoko noticed that Sirin was playing at a slower pace while they maintained their own speed. This tactical shift allowed Sirin to take the lead on the scoreboard. When Sirin had the ball, Kiyoshi screened Takao, who was guarding Kuroko. This created an opportunity for Kuroko, and Izuki passed him the ball. Midorima was taken by surprise when Kuroko got hold of the ball. Instantly, he closed in on Kuroko, determined not to underestimate him, thinking, "I don't know what you're planning, but I won't go easy on you, Kuroko." But to Midorima's astonishment, Kuroko seemed to vanish into thin air. Before he knew it, Kuroko had eluded his defense, leaving Midorima looking in disbelief. Shadoko was equally stunned, scrambling to react, but it was too late. Kuroko passed the ball to Kagami, who added more points to Sirin's score. The game continued, and Shadoko did their utmost to thwart Kuroko's vanishing drive, but it proved to be a formidable challenge. "Even though it was surprising, the overall game dynamics haven't changed much," Momoa remarked. She kept a close eye on the game and continued, "It's still a high-scoring match where neither team can halt the other's attack." However, Kuroko's vanishing drive did give Sirin a slight edge by conserving their energy. Meanwhile, Shadoko had to work harder to maintain their fast-paced play and keep up with the point-scoring competition. Kagami knew they couldn't maintain this pace indefinitely. He realized that for them to secure a victory, he had to take on the challenge of stopping Midorima by himself. This way, they wouldn't have to double-team him and leave a vulnerability in their defense. In the midst of the game, Kagami took a moment to reflect, thinking back to his training days with Alexandra in the United States. Recalling one particular training session, Kagami closed his eyes briefly. "That's not the way to do it, you knucklehead!" she scolded, giving Kagami's head a light smack. He winced and turned to her, clearly frustrated. "What's the right way, then?" Kagami asked, rubbing his aching head. Alexandra let out a sigh. She understood that for someone as fiery and passionate as Kagami, calming his mind was no easy task. "You've got to keep a clear head, Kagami. Emotions can't cloud your judgment," she advised. Izuki controlled the ball, searching for a gap in Shutoku's defense when a sudden, sharp slapping sound echoed across the court. All eyes turned to Kagami, who had just given himself a resounding slap on the face. Kagami's eyes opened wide, but his face displayed an unexpected calmness. Realization dawned on him, and he muttered to himself, "I need to keep a cool head." Midorima, who had observed this peculiar act, couldn't help but feel an ominous shiver. There was something different about Kagami now. Midorima frowned as he mumbled, "He feels different now." Suna couldn't help but smirk. He was eager to see just how much Kagami had evolved. Chapter 122, Chapter 120, title at the end of the chapter. The street ball court was shrouded in darkness, and a red-haired teenager, Kagami, was catching his breath on the ground, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Alex, do you think I'm strong enough to take on those guys now?" Kagami asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Beside him, Alexandra, his mentor, paused, lost in thought as she considered the incredible skills of the generation of miracles. "I'd say you've got a better shot now. And if you can truly grasp what I've been teaching you, you might stand a chance against them," she said, her words reflecting the progress Kagami had made in the past week. Kagami couldn't help but chuckle at her uncertainty, understanding that even Alexandra couldn't be entirely certain. "As expected, I have to reach that zone you talked about to take them down, right?" Kagami raised his hand above his head, his fiery determination evident in his eyes as he clenched his fist. Alexandra remained silent. She knew that someone with Kagami's unwavering passion for basketball had a good shot at entering the zone. "Nevertheless, I'll keep on training. When I go up against that guy again, I'll come out on top," Kagami declared, referring to Aomine, and then stood up to retrieve the basketball from the ground. Alexandra had a warm smile on her face as she observed Kagami. She had come to regard him as a little brother, and she was pleased to see him enjoying his efforts to reach his goal. With the ball in his hands, Kagami looked at Alexandra curiously and asked, "I know you're Fukuda Soo's coach. So, I assume you know Kazama better than I do. I'm curious, do you think I can defeat him?" Kagami couldn't help but think about Suna's victory over Aomine, someone Kagami had struggled to beat. That victory alone elevated Suna's skills to be above Aomine's in Kagami's eyes, and he was eager to understand the extent of Suna's abilities. Upon hearing Kagami's question, Alexandra was caught off guard. Her smile disappeared as she thought about Suna's capabilities. Alexandra had never witnessed Suna's full potential, so she couldn't be certain. Yet, she couldn't fathom Suna losing, even to the generation of miracles. Taking a deep breath, Alexandra looked at Kagami with a serious expression. She said, "You still have a long journey ahead to reach his level." Kagami's eyes opened wide with surprise. He clutched the basketball firmly, unable to conceal his beaming smile. Excitement danced in his gaze as he absorbed the reality of the moment. "I'm so glad I returned to Japan. This is truly exhilarating," Kagami exclaimed, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. Back in the present game, Kagami's elation shone through his wide grin. Kuroko couldn't help but notice a striking similarity between Kagami's excitement and Aomine's demeanor during their time at Teiko. As Sirin notched another score, Kagami approached Kiyoshi. Kagami turned to Kiyoshi and asked, "Senior Kiyoshi, can I take on Midorima by myself?" Kiyoshi appeared taken aback, scratching his head in contemplation. He was unsure how to respond, considering the coach's strategy. I don't know if the coach will approve," he began, but his words trailed off. Kagami's intense determination and the spark in his eyes made it difficult for Kiyoshi to refuse. With a smile, he relented, "All right, Kagami, you've got this. We'll trust you to handle him." "Thanks." Kagami expressed his gratitude and returned to his position, while Kiyoshi moved to his own spot. Hyuga approached Kiyoshi, a bit confused, and inquired about the change. Kiyoshi confidently reassured him that Kagami could handle it. Their coach, Aida, took note of the exchange. When she exchanged glances with Kiyoshi, he offered a comforting smile as usual. Observing Kagami, who seemed more composed than his usual fiery self. She shook her head in wonder and quietly murmured, "Let's see what you're trying to pull off this time, Kagami." Shudoku couldn't help but notice the change in Kagami and exchanged concerned looks. Midorima, in particular, felt a heightened sense of wariness. He remained calm, waiting for the game to resume. He glanced at Kuroko and then at Kagami, his suspicion growing. "There's something going on," he thought, "but I can't figure it out. Regardless, you've just made things easier for me." With Takao passing him the ball, Midorima immediately went into his shooting motion. Kagami quickly moved to close the distance between him and Midorima. However, Midorima was surprised as Kagami didn't jump immediately. He seemed to be waiting for the right moment. Midorima took his shot while jumping, thinking, "I can't miss this opportunity just because I'm unsure of his plan." Kagami also jumped, but it appeared he might have been a bit late, as his attempt to block Midorima's shot didn't succeed. "I'm not quite sure what your plan is," Midorima said as he adjusted his glasses. He watched as the ball smoothly sailed into the basket and continued, "But whatever it is, I won't wait around for it." Kagami simply nodded in response and returned to his position on defense to restart the game. Midorima found this reaction surprising, considering Kagami's fiery nature and would typically have a comeback. This unexpected change in Kagami's demeanor heightened Midorima's sense of unease. As the game pressed on, Shudoku began to take the lead, with Midorima's shots finding their mark once again. As Midorima kept taking shots, he began to sense an unusual feeling creeping over him, and Kagami's defensive pressure seemed to grow with each moment. The entire Sirin team had unwavering faith in Kagami, who persevered with unwavering determination. Kuroko, who had complete trust in Kagami, also observed that with each failed attempt, Kagami's smile and excitement grew wider. "They both really look alike." This transformation reminded him of Ayamine, and he saw a hint of Ayamine's former spirit in Kagami's determination. "The game isn't favoring Sirin right now," Kai's remarked, watching from the sidelines. Momoa and Nijimura exchanged nods as they noticed that Sirin had altered their strategy during the match, seemingly in response to a player's decision. Their coach appeared surprised and hadn't called a timeout. "I don't get why their coach hasn't called for a timeout," Momoa quietly pondered. Suna observed the situation with a calm smile. With the ball in his hands, Midorima sensed intense pressure coming from Kagami as he prepared to take a shot. Their eyes met, and Midorima couldn't shake the feeling that he was facing a predator patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. He tried to dismiss this uneasy sensation and jumped to take his shot. But in an instant, Kagami, with incredible precision, leaped up to block Midorima's attempt. Midorima's eyes widened with disbelief as a hand expertly thwarted his shot. "Could that have been just luck?" Hyuga questioned, his voice tinged with disbelief. Kagami had timed his jump accurately, precisely when Midorima could not alter his move and fake a shot. It was a level of precision that left everyone astounded. Players from both teams stared at Kagami in amazement, and without missing a beat, Kagami sprinted after the blocked ball, launching an immediate counterattack. Shudoku swiftly moved to halt Kagami's progress. Midorima reacted just as quickly, joining the pursuit of Kagami. Yet, Kagami, displaying an uncharacteristic composure and a calm intensity in his eyes, effortlessly evaded their defensive efforts as he headed for a dunk. Anticipating Kagami's intention to dunk, Midorima didn't chase Kagami directly but instead moved towards the basket. As Kagami leaped for the dunk, Midorima was already in the position to block it. But much to Midorima's horror, Kagami appeared to have foreseen his arrival. Kagami fixed him with a cold, calculating gaze as he subtly adjusted his posture mid-air and executed a double clutch maneuver. "What on earth?" Takao couldn't contain his astonishment, loudly expressing his shock. The Shudoku players mirrored his disbelief, their eyes fixed on Kagami in awe. Shudoku's coach stood up in shock, his gaze locked on Kagami. Sirin's coach, Aida, was equally taken aback, her hand covering her mouth in amazement. Meanwhile, Kai's and Nijimura, well acquainted with the intense pressure Kagami was emanating, couldn't help but exclaim, "He's tapping into his beastly instincts." Title: Kagami's Awakening. Chapter 123, Chapter 121, Midorima's Childhood Memories. The crowd erupted into cheers as they witnessed Kagami's remarkable move. The stadium filled with excitement as the cheers echoed all around. Midorima, wearing a shocked expression, couldn't take his eyes off Kagami. So this was his new trick, hey? He muttered as he watched Kagami's determined departure. As time ticked away, Sirin had seized control of the game's momentum. Kuroko's vanishing drive pierced through Shutoko's defenses, and Kagami's newfound beastly instinct prevented Midorima from scoring. Sirin continued to score points one after another, putting the pressure on Shutoko to find a way to turn things around. Kai scratched his head in puzzlement and wondered aloud, Kagami seems to be holding on. I thought he was running out of steam. Nijimura glanced briefly at Kai's, then put his attention to Kagami. He explained, when you tap into your instincts, your movements become fluid and efficient. You act precisely when necessary at the right moment. That's how Kagami has conserved his stamina until now. At the end of the third quarter, Sirin was ahead with a score of 76-63. Both teams were catching their breath on their respective benches. Shutoko looked exhausted and realized they were losing control of the game. They understood that if they didn't take action, things could slip away from them. Midorima appeared deep in thought as he sat on the bench. In a classic Japanese house that bore the unmistakable marks of a distinguished family's ownership, a young boy with striking green hair played by himself. He held a toy airplane in his small hand, his eyes alight with joy as he savored this solitary moment. The boy's giggle filled the air, a vibrant contrast to the serene surroundings, creating a scene that captured the essence of a carefree, blissful childhood. A silhouette approached and gently took hold of the young boy's hand, causing the child to look up in surprise. "What are you up to, little guy?" The young boy's face lit up as he recognized who was holding his hand and cheerfully responded, "Oh, father. I'm just playing with this airplane Grandma gave me. It's so much fun. You should join me, we can play together." The boy's eyes sparkled with excitement, brimming with the innocence and joy of childhood. His father let out a weary sigh, and then he knelt down to meet his son at eye level. With a questioning look, he asked, "Remind me, what's your name?" The young boy furrowed his brow in confusion and replied, "My name is Shintaro Midorima." "Father, why are you asking such an obvious question?" "That's right, you're a Midorima. That's why you shouldn't be playing at this time." His father nodded, a stern expression on his face. "Why?" Young Midorima's enthusiasm dimmed noticeably as he took in his father's words. With a gentle smile, his father reached for Shintaro's hand and suggested, "Let's head to the study room." Young Midorima hesitated, glancing back at his beloved toy before reluctantly taking it along with him. Observing his son's dejected demeanor, his father shook his head with a hint of regret and reassured him, "This is for your own good, little Shin." The following day, young Midorima couldn't locate his only toy anywhere. He asked around, but everyone he questioned claimed nothing about its whereabouts. His sadness was palpable. Once again, his father guided him into the study room, where he was introduced to subjects and lessons that held little interest for him. His father insisted it was for his own good, but the young Shintaro couldn't understand why. As the years passed, he wore glasses dedicated to the studies his father had chosen for him, with little room for anything else. The boy's days were filled with lessons meant to secure his future and uphold the family's honor. Young Midorima initially followed the family's educational path, thinking it was the norm since his older brother did the same. However, his life changed when he discovered basketball in elementary school. It was a sport, and his father didn't mind, in fact, he encouraged it for the health benefits. Young Midorima embraced the game, feeling truly alive after a long time, and it became a significant part of his life. However, "Shin! Hey, it's time to get in the game." Takao was vigorously shaking Midorima, who snapped back to reality. As he scanned his surroundings, Midorima noticed that everyone was giving him strange looks. It was an unusual sight, as Midorima was known for his unwavering focus. Furrowing his brow, he told Takao, "Let go of my shoulder, Takao." Takao shrugged and released his grip. The players then returned to the court as the fourth quarter began. As the game continued, Sirin maintained their relentless push, and Shutoko struggled to keep up. The score gap between the teams continued to widen. What caught everyone's attention was Midorima's unusual reaction. Instead of getting frustrated, he wore a smile that puzzled his teammates. "Shin, did you get possessed by some spirit or something?" Takao quipped, his unease evident in his voice. The rest of the Shutoko team shared his confusion. Midorima occasionally smiled in satisfaction, but this was a different smile they had never seen. "Why? I'm actually enjoying this," Midorima replied with a slight shake of his head. The Shutoko players were left utterly flabbergasted, their mouths agape at the incredible change they witnessed in Midorima. In Sirin's ranks, the players couldn't help but notice the transformation in Midorima. Kuroko felt an increasing unease as the fourth quarter continued. The same went to Kagami's instincts, which were on high alert due to Midorima's transformation. Amid it all, Midorima's mind drifted back to his days at Teiko. He sent the ball arcing high through the air, sinking a satisfying three-point shot. "Nice one, Shintaro." To Midorima's astonishment, Suna was already ahead of him, fully trusting in his shot. A small smile crossed Midorima's face as he replied, "Of course." With every moment on the court, he felt the deep attachment he had to the sport. As he reminisced about these memories, Midorima chuckled, realizing, "Yes, I've been playing basketball since I felt truly alive on the court." At that moment, Midorima was overwhelmed by a powerful conviction as he faced a colossal door, its presence imposing and weighty. He quietly spoke to himself, "Winning is fantastic, but there's something more important. To put everything on the line, you said." With determination in his eyes, he continued, "Isn't that exactly what I need?" As I. Closing the door, he reached for the gap with his finger. His eyes gleamed with unwavering certainty as he declared, "I want to break free." The heavy burden of family expectations had held Midorima back for too long, and he was weary of it all. It was time for a change, a chance to be true to himself. In that profound moment, he grasped his heartfelt desire. Midorima had come to a realization. He wanted to break free and rediscover the joy in life, to be himself finally. For the first time, he recognized the simple truth. He just wanted to have some fun. As he finished his heartfelt declaration, Midorima's determination surged through him. His hand gripped the door with newfound strength, and with a resolute pull, he swung it open. A radiant smile graced his face as he stepped forward into the unknown. Kagami, who was marking Midorima, couldn't believe his eyes as a sudden sense of danger overwhelmed him. His instincts screamed that something was wrong as he watched Midorima. As Takao passed the ball to Midorima. In that very moment, intense pressure engulfed the court, and Midorima's eyes flickered with emerald streaks, sending a shiver down everyone's spine. The entire stadium fell into a hushed stillness as spectators and players alike locked their astonished gazes on Midorima. "He's in the zone," Kai's uttered in disbelief, his voice betraying his astonishment. Chapter 124, Chapter 122, Unstoppable Midorima. Shudoku's coach, Nakatani, watched Midorima with wide-eyed amazement. "The younger generation is getting wilder," he mumbled to himself in astonishment. Sirin's coach, Aida, stood up with a furrowed brow and requested for a timeout for her team. In the game, when Midorima got hold of the ball, he didn't immediately launch into his shooting motion. Instead, he took a moment to dribble, which prompted Kagami to react swiftly by advancing and intensifying his defensive stance. Midorima executed a quick crossover to the right, prompting an instant response from Kagami. But then, Midorima smoothly spun his body in the opposite direction, took a step back, and smoothly transitioned into his shooting motion. Without hesitation, he launched the ball into the air, sending it on a high arc toward the basket. Midorima then nonchalantly turned his back and walked back to his position without sparing a glance at the ball. "Damn it! He was just making a space to shoot," Kagami exclaimed as the ball effortlessly swished through the basket. His shock deepened when he noticed something else, and what's with that lightning-fast release? Momoa widened her eyes and said, "It's not just his dribbling speed. Midorima's shooting release has also reached a new level." Kuroko, wearing a puzzled expression, questioned, "Is that the same zone that Kazama and Ayamine used during the inter-high?" The game abruptly paused as the referee signaled for a timeout for Sirin. Both teams retreated to their respective benches. Sitting on Shudoku's bench, every player was sweating profusely, their eyes fixed on Midorima, who exuded an almost palpable intensity of focus. Silence reigned among the players, and even their coach, Nakatani, chose not to utter a word. The team watched in awe as their ace, the shooter from the generation of miracles, completely shifted the momentum in Shudoku's favor. Takao wore a complex expression as he mused, "I knew he was a monster, but I never thought he could pull something like that off." He glanced at Midorima, who remained motionless on the bench, shaking his head and offering a small smile. Takao then cast a quick glance at Sirin and the scoreboard, which displayed a score of 97-72. "We might be behind in the score, but with Shin in the zone," Takao's eyes sparkled with excitement as he believed that Shudoku had a real chance to win. He confidently declared, "We'll catch up in no time." Conversely, on Sirin's bench, a somber mood prevailed. Aida wore a pensive expression, deep in thought about how to maintain their hard-earned score advantage. Kyoshi wore a serious expression as he voiced his concern, should I assist Kagami in guarding Midorima again? No, that would leave a significant gap in our defense. With uncertainty hanging in the air, Aida disagreed. Kyoshi was initially surprised but eventually nodded in understanding. Furthermore, Aida said in a measured tone, her gaze shifting to Midorima, there's a saying that the only one capable of stopping someone in the zone is another who's in the zone. Let's revert to a high-scoring battle. The game is approaching its conclusion, and if we can uphold our lead, victory is ours. Aida proposed, her words filled with thoughtfulness. She then directed her attention to Kuroko, saying, let's implement our new form of high-leveled run and gun. All the Sirin players nodded collectively, their expressions resolute. The game continued, and Sirin stuck to their new fast-paced approach, using it to outmaneuver Shutoku's defense. However, their confidence in maintaining their lead wavered when they witnessed yet another awe-inspiring, perfectly arced shot, its graceful trajectory unmarred by any rotation, as it effortlessly sailed into their basket. As the clock ticked away, Midorima's performance was nothing short of exceptional. Shutoku was rapidly narrowing the score difference with Sirin. Sirin's players could only grit their teeth in increasing frustration. Even with their new scoring strategy, Midorima remained an unstoppable scoring machine, his performance seemingly inhuman. The crowd in the stadium erupted in cheers and excitement as they witnessed this remarkable spectacle. Izuki got the ball and made a precise pass to Hyuga, who carried it forward, adding to the pressure on Shutoku's defense. But right when Hyuga had passed the ball to Kuroko for him to make his way into Shutoku's inner area, something extraordinary happened. Midorima, like a bolt of green lightning, appeared in Kuroko's path. With no other option, Kuroko held onto the ball, a frown on his face. He muttered, I'll just have to find a way around your defense, then. Kuroko dribbled the ball, trying to advance it against Midorima's tight defense. His misdirection aura was in full force as he passed by Midorima effortlessly. But his surprise grew when he turned around, only to find that the ball was gone. Sirin players were stunned, and they cried out. Kuroko's drive got stopped. Midorima had the ball and aimed for a shot. Kagami tried to block him but couldn't reach him in time. With a swift release, Midorima's shot found the net with a perfect swish. Midorimaki broke Kuroko's vanishing drive. Kai's muttered in disbelief. He gripped his fist in determination as his eyes flashed before he thought to himself, so, entering the zone could truly bring someone's 100% in a game, hey. Nijimura watched the court with a serious expression. Did he know that Midorima was able to enter the zone? He then turned to Tsuna, who seemed to be unusually interested in the game. He wondered if Tsuna had anticipated Midorima entering the zone. When a player entered the zone, their concentration was unmatched. Tricks like Kuroko's misdirection didn't work, and it was clear that Midorima wasn't the least bit distracted by it. With Kuroko's terrible basic skills, Midorima could easily steal the ball from him. As the game continued, Sirin's players were growing increasingly frustrated. Their new strategy didn't seem effective against Midorima and Takao, who were immune to Kuroko's misdirection. As Midorima continued to score right in front of him, Kagami's frustration swelled. The sight of his teammates' exasperated face weighed heavily on him. He muttered to himself, why am I this weak? To beat the zone, I have to be in the zone. Kagami had heard this before from Alexandra. But the door to that state remained firmly shut. However, why can't I unlock it? Kagami let out a scream, standing before an imposing, pressure-filled door. Why? Why can't I open it? Desperation welled up within him as he punched the door, causing his hand to bleed. Tsuna observed Kagami with amazement, sensing the mounting pressure within him. Could he unlock it during this game? Chapter 125, Chapter 123, The Breaking Point. However, as Midorima pierced through Kagami's defense, a sudden thud echoed through the court. Kagami's eyes widened in disbelief as the referee's whistle blew for a foul. He snapped back to reality and rushed over to the fallen player. Tsuna couldn't help but feel that the opportunity to unlock it today had slipped away as he watched the unfolding events on the court. He mumbled, that's unfortunate. Back in the court, Midorima wore a frown as he stared down at Kuroko, who was on the ground. He voiced his disapproval, saying, Oh Hasa horoscope has always been right, hey? Aquarius, always my nemesis, Kuroko. Kuroko managed to stand with Kagami's assistance. He looked up at Midorima with a determined expression. The scoreboard displayed 101 to 101. The game hung in the balance, with only 7 seconds remaining before the final whistle. They couldn't bear the thought of losing this crucial moment. As the game pressed on, the players exchanged glances. Izuki swiftly passed the ball to Kuroko, who then unleashed his ignite pass, sending the ball high into the air toward Shutoku's basket. Both teams were filled with unyielding determination as they shouted together, "Fight for the ball! Don't let them grab it!" Kuroko's pass was intended for Kagami, who soared into the air to catch it. Yet, Atsubo and Kimura were swift in their response, leaping alongside Kagami to contest for the ball. Amidst the three outstretched hands, another hand joined the fray, taking everyone by surprise. Atsubo's eyes widened as he saw Kiyoshi, who was shouting at the top of his lungs. "His grip is too strong!" Kimura thought in frustration as Kiyoshi snatched the ball right in front of them. As they all touched down, Kiyoshi immediately moved for a dunk. The whole of Sirin erupted in a cheer, "Dunk it, Kiyoshi!" As Kiyoshi was about to complete the dunk, Midorima's hand suddenly streaked through the air, blocking his path. Kiyoshi's eyes widened in shock at the last-second interference. Then, Kiyoshi thought, quickly changing his goal from slamming the ball in and pushing it toward Kuroko instead. The entire court was on edge. Both teams, their reserves and coaches, all standing up and unable to tear their eyes away from the unfolding scene. Kuroko didn't hesitate for a moment, his eyes filled with determination. "There's only one option. Ugh, I should have reacted faster." Takao muttered through gritted teeth, realizing he had missed the crucial moment as Kuroko swiftly passed the ball into Kagami's waiting hands, and Kagami leaped up. However, Midorima, who had just landed, closed the gap between them instantly and leaped to block Kagami's dunk. How could he react so quickly? Hyuga muttered in disbelief. Midorima deftly blocked the ball in Kagami's hands. Kagami clenched his teeth and exerted even more force as their hands collided. But, because Midorima had leveraged his jumping momentum to thwart Kagami's dunk, Kagami came to the painful realization that he couldn't overpower it. And the ball slipped from his grasp and headed in Takao's direction. "Looks like the basketball gods are smiling upon Shutoku," Takao muttered under his breath, exchanging a knowing glance with Midorima. "What an incredibly intense game! Is this really just the final league? This intensity could rival the actual tournament." The crowd became increasingly frenzied as they witnessed the unfolding drama, their excitement building for the impending outcome. The game was hanging by a thread, with just 7 seconds left on the clock. Midorima swiftly moved to an open spot after landing, and Takao acknowledged this by passing the ball to him. But Kagami was shadowing Midorima's every step. The moment the ball reached Midorima, he seamlessly transitioned into his shooting motion. Kagami, who was in hot pursuit of Midorima, increased the pressure on his feet as he prepared to jump. However, a sharp pain shot through his legs, causing him to glance down at his aching feet. Despite the pain, his overwhelming frustration eclipsed any physical discomfort. He watched in disbelief as Midorima initiated his shooting motion, helpless to do anything to prevent it. "We've got this game," Midorima thought, propelling himself into what should have been a jump. Yet, to his astonishment, he remained grounded, unable to leap. Midorima stared at his shaking legs in confusion, a mix of pain and frustration etched on his face. "I've counted my shots. I should still be able to shoot for a couple more." Then, the memory of Tsuna's words about the toll the zone took on the body flashed through his mind. "In the end, this is my limit, hey." Midorima clenched his teeth, realizing he was reaching his limit. Out of nowhere, Kuroko materialized like a wraith, knocking the ball out of Midorima's grasp. He could only ground his teeth in frustration, glaring intensely at Kuroko. As the ball sailed out of bounds, the referee's whistle pierced the air, signaling the end of the game. Players from both teams fixed their gaze on the scoreboard, frustration evident on their faces. The scoreboard displayed a tied score of 101 to 101. The crowd, initially taken aback by the unexpected outcome, fell into a momentary silence before erupting into applause. Their applause was not only for the incredible tension of the match but also as an appreciation for the fantastic spectacle they had just witnessed. Amidst all this commotion, "A tie even with my interference. Quite disappointing," Tsuna muttered, observing the just concluded game. He cast a contemplative glance in Kuroko's direction. "Will they play overtime?" Kai's inquired. Momoa shook her head and explained, "No, the committee decided to accelerate the league for the Winter Cup, so there's no overtime rule." Well, I suppose it's for the best, Nijimura commented with a shake of his head. Kai's, curious, tilted his head and inquired, "Oh? Why's that?" Nijimura gestured toward Midorima and Kagami, explaining, they're both had already pushing themselves to the brink. Going further could lead to injuries. Kai's eyes widened in disbelief, and he quickly turned his attention to Midorima and Kagami, whom Takao and Kuroko were now assisting. They really pushed themselves to the limit, didn't they? He remarked. On the court, Midorima struggled to stand with Takao's help as his legs wobbled beneath him. He turned his gaze to Kagami and Kuroko, determination in his eyes. This isn't the end. I can't settle for a tie. I feel the same way. Kagami responded with a scoff. Then, we'll determine the victor in the next stage. Kuroko declared with a serious tone. Midorima agreed, shifting his attention to Tsuna, who observed the match from the audience. With a resolute expression, he said, "Indeed, let's settle it in the actual tournament."
Thanks for listening.